Chapter 20 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 20 A Lottery. On the second day after leaving Dawson, John Berwick and his partners camped on Dominion Creek, worn out and weary. Their commissariat was equal to a 3 weeks' stay, and their tools and their bedding were added to the load. Hugh remained their leader. While John and George had been prospecting their quartz find, he had visited Dominion Creek, and found many miners looking with avidity towards the claims on the left limit of the creek, several miles below the confluence of Caribou. It was to this locality that he directed the party. The laws governing the taking up of placer claims in the Yukon demanded that the applicant should swear to the finding of gold. No quantity was mentioned. John and George had met this difficulty when they applied for the placer claims on the Bonanza hillsides; but this technicality had been smilingly dispensed with by the record clerk on the consideration that nobody wanted the ground for placer. In the case of the Dominion Creek hillsides, however, they determined to make discoveries if possible. They pitched their tent upon the hillside, which rose in a gentle incline from the creek. If any former channel ran underneath the ground they had chosen, it could not be very far to bed rock. They picked their 4 claims, and numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4. They drew lots for them. John had 1, Hugh 2, Frank 3, and George the 4th. As their tent was small, they determined that 2 of them should work at night time and 2 by day. This also meant that a continuous watch could be kept. Miners from the creek claims visited them, curious to learn their motive. When they were told that the party expected the claims to be some day thrown open, they smiled in superior wisdom. Each of the 4 began to sink a shaft to the bed rock of his claim. A single man can sink a hole 10, even 12 feet, but after that a windlass is necessary to hoist the dirt. It was arranged that the first day they all should work, George and Frank continuing the watch through the night. They began early in the morning of the first day, each on his claim. Each made a little clearing around the spot he had chosen as the locality of his first shaft. The growth was not heavy, and was quickly disposed of. By noon each had made a hole about 3 feet deep. No frost was met as yet. It was George who first reached bed rock at 5 foot depth. He went to the other workers and announced the fact. Hugh had expected it to be 30 or 25 feet at least. Their first feeling was of disappointment. The party gathered about the pit, and Hugh jumped into it. There was about a foot of gravel above the bed rock. Hugh picked out a pebble lying directly on bed rock, and smoothed over its muddy surface with his fingers. His eyes brightened. It gleamed with half a dozen specks of gold. He passed it up to the others, who gazed on it gladly. They gave him a pan. Hugh scooped it full of gravel and scrambled out of the hole. The others turned towards the creek. "No, fellows, I've got a pool located up in the bushes here," and he looked away from the creek. "What those fellows on the creek don't know won't do them no harm." He led the way through the bushes. Arriving at the pool, he dipped the pan into the water and shook it. He then placed it on the ground, grabbed a handful of the pebbles, washed them in the water of the pan, and threw them away. He continued this process till he had removed the larger stones. Then again he whirled the pan in the water, this time more vigorously. He picked out the smaller pebbles, and replaced the pan in the water, whirled and shook it again, frequently lifting it out on an incline, allowing the off-rushing water to carry away the small pebbles and sand. This process he kept up till but a handful of stuff remained at the bottom. He kept the pan on an incline, which caused the stuff to remain at one side. He moved the pan gently to and fro, with occasional quick shakings. Very gently he drew the pan in and out of the water, the ebb to draw off the lighter sand. The residue in the pan became but a spoonful or 2, and now occasionally a golden speck shone and gleamed. The sand in the pan became less, and some of it was black, the black sand of the miners, magnetic from the iron which so largely composes it. As the process proceeded, the sideward motion occasionally carried the body of black sand away, leaving a trail of gleaming yellow dust. The black sand had at last all been washed over the side of the pan. Hugh, with his fingers, massed the gold into a little pile, and muttered, 75 cents. 3 bob, George repeated after him. The pan was passed from hand to hand for scrutiny and comment. "Not bad," said John. "You bet it ain't," agreed Hugh, "even if it don't rank with Eldorado. This ground ain't deep, and the surface can be ground sluiced off. Let us try another pan off of bedrock." The pan was again filled and the process of washing resumed. "If we get 2 cents in this gravel a foot off of bedrock, I'll be satisfied," was Hugh's comment. He got this time what he estimated to be 5 cents. "Perhaps this is above average," he muttered. Your old-time miner is ever a sceptic. So while he was washing this second pan, Hugh's mind was at work. "George, I guess you had better go and chuck back all the gravel and wash into the hole and get a fire built on it quick. The ashes will hide the wash, and any person looking down the hole will simply think that you have struck frost and are using fire. The rest of us will keep going till we strike wash." Frank reached gravel at about 7 feet, and reported the same to Hugh, who suggested that he should work a small hole to bedrock to get a pan of gravel from that point. Hugh cautioned Frank against throwing any gravel out of the shaft to attract the notice of passers by. Frank secured a pan of dirt immediately on bedrock, and Hugh panned it for him. Frank was the only one of the 4 not a miner. The pan yielded a little better than that of George had done. Hugh suggested significantly that Frank had found frost at the bottom of his shaft, which induced the latter to mutter, "Ground heap frozen, all same rock, no catch 'em gold without fire, he he." This was supposed to be a humorous imitation of the Siwash. "Never mind your Siwash, sweethearts, but get the fire in quick. I suppose if you do strike it rich, or ever get this claim, which is sure worth something, it will be heap klooch, heap dance all the time. Get a move on, or some rubberneck will be mooching round here." Hugh went back to his pit, and both he and John had struck real frost before Frank roared, "Supper!" During the meal and afterwards the conversation was about the claims and the prospect of their getting them. It was 2 weeks yet before they could be judiciously staked. In the meantime Frank and George could put down other shafts prospecting the width and extent of the pay streak, while John and Hugh were getting their shaft down to bedrock. It would be slow work for these two, now that they had struck frost, which necessitated thawing by wood fires. "I guess we need a cabin on these claims," said Hugh. "It's more a sign we're holding them down, and if we start building we can kill time so as not to look conspicuous, as we would if we was just to sit and do nothing. It would have the rubbernecks guessing." So the work continued upon the 4 hillside claims on Dominion Creek, John and Hugh working at day, George and Frank at night. These two, holding the vigil of the second night, again found bedrock and gold 20 feet further up the hillside than their first shafts. On the day following, John and Hugh quickly cleared the bottom of their shafts of the earth which the fires, burning through the night, had thawed. They then set new fires, and sat in the shade of a tree while they burned. The bedrock on each of their claims was deeper than that on the claims of their 2 associates, and both felt that their claims would prove the richer, though neither of them uttered this thought. The minds of all were planning how best to gain possession of their discoveries. "I guess," said Hugh, as he lit his pipe and slapped divers mosquitoes to death, "that it ain't altogether judicious for George and Frank to perforate this here landscape with any more shafts. There is sure to be some fellows rubbernecking here soon. I see some water has seeped into the 2 holes they sunk first, and the other 2 will probably fill soon. This will keep others from investigating. I guess they had better get to work on a cabin, which we will help them with as soon as we get bedrock ourselves. These claims is mighty well worth holding on to, and we don't want to run no chances of not getting them, which we sure won't do if Pooh Bah's gang gets on to the fact that they are any good." When the 4 were seated round the evening meal the matter was talked over, and Frank and George agreed to start building a cabin. The work was begun that very night. Days came and went, yet neither John nor Hugh found bedrock, although each shaft was now 15 feet deep. At 12-foot depth a windlass had been constructed on each claim, and the earth hoisted from the shaft. At 18 feet Hugh struck gravel. As John, who worked on the windlass, dumped a bucket of gravel, he would hide it by shovelling over it earth from the dump. Finding gravel there at that depth suggested gold. In fact, the depth to which the shaft was sunk without striking bedrock was sufficiently compromising. At last bedrock was reached, and a pan of dirt extracted. The pan was washed, and a nugget worth fully $1.50, besides about $2 in fine gold, was its product. Here was wealth and no mistake. "Yee, you chickaman stuff, hee hee!" laughed Frank. They all looked into each other's eyes. Hugh gritted his teeth as he thought of Pooh Bah. If there was any extent of this gravel it constituted a fortune. Yes, very little of this ground meant wealth. How much of it would there be? Was this gold of Dominion Creek pay streak? He did not know. The great thing about mining is, you never know. John Shaft found bedrock at 22 feet, where he got a good $5 to the pan. Frank jabbered; the others said but little. It was late in the afternoon when the pan of dirt from John's shaft was tried. After supper Hugh took a stroll. He walked far up the hillside, and gazed at the tributary valley that ran into Dominion Creek, just upstream from John's claim. This "pup," as the miners termed these small tributaries, Hugh noticed had been staked and prospected, but had not yielded pay. He had already planned to use its water for the washing of the gravel should he gain possession of his claim. He then walked down to the adjacent claim being worked on Dominion Creek, and began asking questions of the man at the windlass. He was always ready to receive information, though he seldom gave any. The ground on Dominion was rich, enormously rich, $10, $20, and sometimes $50 pans. Upstream the second claim was not nearly so rich. The man at the windlass did not know the value of the intervening claim; it was held by the Government. "How far are you to bedrock?" "About 25 feet." "Much gravel?" "About 3 feet, hardly 3 feet." Hugh was tempted to ask how deep the miners, who had prospected the pup, had gone before they had struck pay, but did not, because he gave the man credit for intelligence. "Black muck above gravel?" he asked. "Yes, or we would not be working with wood fires now. Black muck takes a lot to thaw; but as it is, I guess we shall have to quit till winter, but we have proved our ground rich." Until the advent of steam thawing machines the Klondike miners thawed their ground by wood fires, which process can only be carried on extensively in winter. Hugh left the miner and walked to the mouth of the pup. With a pole he sounded the depth of an abandoned shaft. It was 15 feet. He walked to the camp and found John, the others being at work on the cabin. "John, the bedrock at the bottom of your shaft dips towards my claim, and the bedrock in my shaft dips towards your claim." "Yes." "The fellow at the windlass on the creek claim tells me that he is in the biggest kind of pay outside of El Dorado, but that the second claim upstream is not up to much. He has muck." "Yes." "We have earth and broken rock down to the gravel." "Yes." "His shaft is 25 feet to bedrock, and if we sank a shaft half way between yours and mine we would find it deeper than either." "In all probability, yes." "Don't you see what I'm driving at?" "No," John answered bluntly. "You've caught on to that pup upstream there." "I have." "Well, it's only 15 feet to bedrock there. The old channel of that pup runs underneath your claim and mine, and is mighty rich. The gold found on the creek claim looks exactly like ours. I saw some of it lying in a pan." John was watching the face of his friend intently. "These hillside claims are 250 feet long, and stretch 1,000 feet back, which means the chances are that the claims you and I are prospecting cover 1,000 feet of mighty rich ground." "We are wealthy men," said John. And his thought passed in a flash to Alice Peel. "Hold on, we ain't got them yet," counselled Hugh. His mind reverted to Pooh Bah. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 21 The Peels' Hospital. Alice Peel and her father, the Surgeon Major, arrived in Dawson by one of the first steamers from St. Michael's. It was late in the evening when they docked, so they arranged to stay on board all night. This made it possible for them to see some of the sights ere they retired. They landed and mingled with the crowds preparatory to finding lodgings. Alice suggested they should ascertain the whereabouts of the rector. Her father did so, and when he thanked the man of whom he inquired, added, "I'll look him up to morrow." "Might as well do so right away, quick. He's always hanging round there." "But it's 11 o'clock." "Don't make no difference in Dawson." Alice and her father thereupon picked their way towards the police barracks, where on the banks of the Slough rested the little log church. It was shut off from the street by a rustic fence, a peaceful sight. Alice and her father were standing regarding it, and had almost made up their minds to enter, to see if any one was about, when their attention was attracted by a man in a boat mooring his craft beside the church grounds. He landed his bundle of blankets, and was spreading them under the church window, when a slight figure with bared head stepped out of the door and stood looking at the intruder. The man folded up his coat that it might serve as a pillow, and was placing it in the prescribed position, when the rector spoke. "You'll have to get out of this." The man looked up and stared. "Say, parson, are you any relation to the Good Samaritan?" This was rather a poser. A suitable reply was evidently not ready on the moment. "No, I'm not, I'm sorry to say. But what's the matter with you?" "Just broke. Besides, if I wasn't, I don't see why I need pay $1 for a bed when I have my own blanket. What are you, High Church or Low Church?" "I'm anything you like. But you'll have to get out of this. If you sleep there you'll roll over and crush my flowers. But what are you?" "Everything you don't like, I guess." "No, that you're not. But the thing is, if I let one of you fellows camp here, I'll have 100 in no time." "All right. I don't mind sleeping inside the church, if you don't want the other fellows to see me." What could be done with such a man? "But I'm going to have service at 12 o'clock for any of the boys coming in from the creeks." "I don't mind the services. Singing won't keep me awake. And as for sermons—" "It looks as if I can't get rid of you. I suppose I'll have to stand for it. Roll up your blankets. You can sleep inside after service." As the clergyman turned to re-enter the building, he noticed Alice and her father regarding him and his guest with some amusement. He advanced to them and held out his hand. "We arrived this evening, and thought we should like to look you up and gain some knowledge of Dawson and the manners and customs of its people," said Alice. "You have evidently been enjoying an exhibition of them. Come in and see our church." They entered the yard and walked towards the door, watching the intruder wrestle with his bedding. They passed into the church, and to Alice it seemed fitting that this should be the first log building she had ever entered, the first roof to cover her in the new world. Being a thorough churchwoman, it was to her a matter of satisfaction and sentiment. As they stood before the altar, others entered, whereupon their host looked at his watch. "It is almost time," he said. "May we stay?" asked Alice. "Assuredly." The night was cloudy outside, and the church too dark for reading, so the clergyman brought out and placed 2 candles upon the altar. The father and daughter each noted the candlesticks were bottles. How incongruous, thought the surgeon major. The one had evidently held gin, the other whisky. The service was short, just a lesson and a hymn. Only half a dozen were present. When it came to the hymn, the clergyman beckoned to Alice and her father. Each accepted from the clerk's hand a bottle and a candle, and he motioned them to stand on either side of him. This they did, he holding the hymn book. They sang, "I need thee every hour." After the service the newcomers waited for the clergyman, and the 3 passed down towards the door. The intruder was already making his bed. "Say, parson, that wasn't bad," he said. "What wasn't bad?" "That there tune. But I never thought you'd confess it." "Confess what?" "That you needed it every hour. Isn't that what you meant by having the chechachoes hold the bottles?" "No, it wasn't." The parson was annoyed. "You get out of here in the morning, or I'll throw you into the slough." "All right, pard." "Your friend seems somewhat facetious," remarked Surgeon Major Peel. "Yes, they are all friends of mine. They all know me. If they don't, their friends do. This man is a type of what I have to deal with." Then they settled down to the business on which the Peels had called. "If you have the necessary supplies," said the parson, "a private hospital is the thing. There is a great deal of sickness now. The typhoid is getting bad. Too many living in the manner of our friend at the church. Food poor and badly cooked, general uncleanness, hard trails and stampedes." The parson conducted the newcomers to their boat, and left them satisfied and almost contented. Alice asked him, as he was taking his leave, if he knew John Berwick, but had for answer no. She wanted to inquire at the post office, but could not get near enough on account of the long lines of men standing before the wickets, postal affairs being in a state of chaos. It was evidently more than possible that John had not received her letters, or at any rate the communication which told of her coming. On the morrow, the Peels, giving fulfilment to their intentions, secured a building in Dawson, and so St. George's Private Hospital came into being. It was a matter of much detail. Help and assistance of every kind was enormously dear. They had changed their money into gold dust, and each carried a "poke." Alice was astounded when she reckoned the equivalent of the charge made by the man who brought their heavy luggage. Half an ounce of dust meant 30 shillings. There were no idle hands in Dawson. It was the hum of industry, except with the loungers at the waterfront. Alice worked hard, and her work brought distraction. Now she was near John Berwick, at least she ought to be, but had heard of so many cases of drowning, deaths by fever and scurvy in that terrible country, that she could only fear possibilities, and eagerly scan every face she met. She stared into the faces of men of uncouth beards and matted, greasy hair, and, as was the custom of the country, her gaze was returned. All seeing her wondered what had brought this fragrant, gentle English girl to Dawson. She was so different from the women of the underworld, hitherto the only representatives, with 1 or 2 exceptions, of womanhood in that place. Her fresh complexion contrasted with their painted cheeks, her simple grace with their brazenness and vulgarity. Oh, it was pitiful! In the shops, wherever she went, she asked about John Berwick. Only once was she in some measure successful. "I think there was a fellow by that name bought a bill of goods, and said he would be back for them later, one day not long ago. He must be living near Dawson," said the man. "Why do you say that?" eagerly asked Alice. "Because the grub he bought weren't the kind of grub men takes with them on long trips. Besides, he didn't buy enough to last him long." She thanked him, and left her name and address in Dawson. Alice was possessed of the faith that only death can kill, and that faith gave her patience. She buckled to her work, and was content. Had she been less industrious, she might have found the trails up the Dome, and to John; but no sooner had the hospital opened than patients came pouring in. Nurses of experience were impossible to obtain. She and her father had to struggle with the help of only 1 woman and 3 men. All were untrained and inexperienced. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 22 The Last Straw. One night George ran into the tent, and shook life into John and Hugh. "They're here!" "Who?" "Poo Bah's gang!" At once the two were wide awake. Hugh stuck his head out of the tent, and saw a number of men walking down the creek carrying stakes over their shoulders. He darted back, and clambered into his clothes. John followed his example. "Where's Frank?" asked Hugh. George went to the tent door, and gave a low whistle. Frank made his appearance. Each man armed himself with his 2 stakes, and made towards the downhill limit of his claim, and drove them in at their proper places. One stake bore the legend, "I claim 200 feet down stream and 1,000 feet uphill for placer mining purposes. John Berwick, miner's licence number T 64859." The other was similar, except that it claimed upstream. The claims were staked in the small hours of July 12 in the year 1898, the day of the great Dominion Creek stampede. The party then ate a hasty meal, and took food for luncheon. At about 4 o'clock they set out for Dawson, a distance of 40 miles. They hoped to reach the city by 6 p.m. They passed the minions of the great grafter. "Travelling early, gentlemen," said one of them. "Not so many flies," answered Hugh. Occasionally wild-eyed men passed them, with a stride that seemed as if it could never tire. This was an hour or 2 after John and his friends had set out. These men had evidently been given the "tip" the night before, and had begun to travel at once. News spreads in a mining camp with amazing rapidity, and the crowd of hurrying men grew greater as the party progressed. It was also noted that the fever was most marked in those who felt themselves at the rear of the stampede. Those in the lead carried nothing save a little axe. Their bodies' sustenance was in their pockets, often consisting only of a few pots of beef extract. When time for resting came, the little axe would serve to make a spruce bed. Covering was not needed in the summer, as rest was taken in daytime, often in the full glare of the sun, a form of repose generally limited to negroes and savages. The 12th of July, 1898, was one of the hottest days of the hottest season Dawson had ever known. The thermometer was nearly 90 in the shade. The land was parched for water, and the smoke of forest fires filled the air, which seemed to burn the throats of those madmen. They coughed as they hurried by. The party passed the Bonanza Dome and commenced the decline into the Bonanza Valley. The trail followed the Hog's Back which ends in Carmack's Forks, the confluence of two branches of the upper Bonanza. The descent to them was rapid, and the steep ascent of 1,000 feet seemed terrible to the stampeders. Yet up it they stormed and struggled till they fell exhausted. Even in the glaring sun men lay dead beat, panting. They were 20 miles from Dawson, 20 hard miles yet rested between them and their goal. It seemed as if this stampede were born of frenzy in a last final effort of the desperate gold seekers of that year. They were close to the end of the rainbow, where lay prizes for a few. There was no more of the old affected humour of the road. Drawn faces and staring eyes were telling of soul strain. It was the last scene of the last act of a real tragedy. At the spring beneath a group of stunted spruce trees, at which, more or less, every man who has sought the glittering dust of the Klondike has gained refreshment, the party of 4 halted for lunch. A dozen men were already about it in all postures of fatigue. As soon as one got up and staggered on, his place was occupied by a newcomer, who would gulp his fill of the blessed water and lie for a time inert. They came and they went. Not a word was said. "Where are you stampeding to?" John at last asked one, who seemed less exhausted than the others. "I don't know. Just following the crowd. Something doing on Dominion, they say, the hillsides. Some say the creek claims held by the Government are being thrown open, but I guess not." Just following the crowd! It is ever the way in gold rushes. No wonder the man who had advised them to keep on going till they struck St. Michael's had said it was a disease. They passed on down the Bonanza trail. Soon the majority of the people met were other than the stampeders. The stampeders were in the crowd, but the bulk were those engaged in the ordinary economic development of Bonanza. They passed from the valley of Bonanza after each had contributed the usual 25 cents to the coffers of Poo Bah. Here they were but a mile or two from Dawson, and the flood of stampeders had passed. As they approached the ferry they noticed a group of men standing before a cabin, evidently examining something. They joined the crowd and saw a little woman with an infant in her arms. "My, look at the baby," said an individual bearing the superior dignity of an old timer. "It's the first white baby I've seen in 6 year. Kind of makes me think of home. You say it was born inside here?" "Yes, right here in this cabin, where my husband and I have wintered. He is off on the stampede." "I've only been in the country 2 months, yet the sight of that baby makes me think of a land where there ain't no Bonanza Creek trail," sighed a chechacho. "Ain't you frightened to live here alone?" "No, nobody will harm a respectable woman in Dawson." The speaker's face shone with pride, which was not all that of motherhood. The old timer threw a nugget of gold on the baby's breast as he walked away, desiring that the mother should buy the child something. The contribution was becoming general, when the mother protested. She knew there were many in the crowd who could not afford such a gift, and that any miner would part with his last cent rather than appear before his fellows as lacking in generosity or holding anything but a contempt for money. To cross Poo Bah's ferry cost each person an additional 25 cents. There was none other than Poo Bah's ferry, for his franchise was exclusive. Many impoverished prospectors had attempted to retrieve their fortunes by plying at the river, but were stopped. After eating their evening meal at the home camp, the party passed down into the city to take their places in the line before the Gold Commissioner's office. None of the Dominion Creek stampeders had yet arrived, and the line was its usual length. They knew that ere the morning arrived the line would be much increased, and hundreds would have arrived within 24 hours. So as 9 o'clock came they all lay down at full length on the earth and slept, indifferent to the current of life about them. This was the life of the goldfields: absolute lack of conventionality and indifference to social distinction. Just before John fell asleep he noticed some men slipping into the Gold Commissioner's office by a side door, among whom were Hardman and the Cap. Mentioning this on the day following, Hugh remarked that they had stayed in the office till late. In the morning a policeman was consulted, and Frank was commissioned to leave his place in the line, visit a shop, and buy tinned meat and biscuit. The policeman would recognize Frank when he returned and see that he got his place. So the friends secured their morning meal. As was expected, the morning saw the arrival of the first of the Dominion Creek stampeders. They had staked their claims and returned to add to the length of the waiting line. Their faces and appearance told something of the terrors of their experience. Bodies limp and eyes glazed, faces wan and expressionless, these were the result of 36 hours of intense muscular and nervous strain. The gold frenzy is the hardest, harshest of tax masters, drawing its victims into such self-inflicted labour as, if imposed by an employer, would rouse the protests of civilized humanity. Such toil breeds the determination to have and to hold what is justly won, develops sympathy for the rights of others, and will push aside the laws of custom and society if they stand in the way of justice. The office doors were opened, and the slow procession began. It was an hour past noon when John and his 3 companions stood before the wicket where the whiskered hardman was at work. Hugh came first, John next, then George, lastly Frank. "We want to record hillsides on Dominion," said Hugh. "What numbers?" "I have lower half, 50 below centre discovery left limit, and my friend here has upper half." Hardman grabbed a book and turned over the leaves to the space allotted these claims. "These claims are already recorded," which answer was not unexpected. "When were they staked?" Fatigued though he was, Hugh's face was livid with anger. "At 1 minute past midnight on the 11th of July, 1898. "No, they wasn't." "Well, that is what the affidavit says, which I entered late yesterday afternoon." John now interposed. "We have been camped on this ground for 3 weeks, and have been on continuous watch. We staked these claims at 4 a.m. yesterday. No stakes were in the ground when we staked." "I can't help that. Joseph Trudean swears he staked one, and Ole Anderson swears he staked the other." "Say, have these claims been transferred?" asked Hugh. "Yes, each has been sold to James C. Beecher, barrister of Dawson." "And the consideration?" $1. "Which would not buy a meal in Dawson." Sick and beaten, John and Hugh stepped aside. George and Frank passed to the slaughter. Their friends waited for them. The time to wait was not long, the second 2 being even more quickly disposed of than the first. They went home and ate a meal. Even Frank was reduced to seriousness, his only possible return to cheerfulness being when he said, "He, he, I told you it was time Uncle Sam came and took Canada." John Berwick felt himself prompted to say Amen. They early sought repose, but about 9 in the evening John arose and dressed himself. He had slept but 4 hours when he suddenly awakened. Something called him to action. Hugh awakened too, and asked the time. He then also arose, as did the others. No one explained why he was dressing, or what he intended to do. Without words, each knew they were going to the city. The call was on them to enter the haunts of men, to speak of their wrongs and to be heard. They had tea, and set out over the trail called after the great Alaska Commercial Company, who built it to the city. The flowers that bloomed by the wayside drew the eyes of John, who even in this hour of disappointment and anger was alive to the beauties of nature. The dog roses, great in size and delicate in colour, greeted him as old friends, and carried his mind to England and to Alice. The atmosphere of Dawson was latent with strong emotion. There was no noise. A malamute howled, and those hearing him shuddered. Men stood in groups and talked. Their tones were low, their eyes alert. But in the Borealis saloon Joseph Andrews jumped upon the bar and addressed the House. That he suspended the dance, which brought the proprietor many hundreds of dollars daily, was overlooked in the face of national disaster, for these men of Dawson had become as a nation, united and distinctive. John Berwick and his friends were drawn by the voice that came through the door of Dawson's most popular rendezvous. Straining to look over the heads and shoulders in front of them, they saw a man, red in face, through the strain of his oratory, standing on the bar and gesticulating. A crowd of eager men listened to him intently. "I tell you fellows from South Africa that the government of this here country has got that of Paul Kruger done to a finish. Paul is a genius at grafting. But where does he figure, with his coarse schemes of dynamite monopolies, in comparison with the liquor law handed out by the gang of thugs and highway robbers who run this country? I tell you, the octopus and his liquor permit system has got Paul Kruger beaten to death. Permit system, permit system, permit system, nothing! Graft, graft, graft! That's what it is, graft! The octopus tells the good ladies down east that he doesn't approve of the liquor traffic, that he won't allow any liquor to go into this country unless by special permit from him. But what are these permits? They're handed out in 10,000-gallon blocks, and there's enough whiskey in Dawson City and on the way here to float a battleship. And who gets the permits? His own pals and the Jews. Jews, gentlemen, Jews. And the quid pro quo is a contribution to this same octopus's electioneering fund. Here, gentlemen, under a surface showing of morality and pink tea temperance, are true fissure veins of graft, assaying high in craft and subtlety. Men of the Yukon, are we going to stand for it? Have we got to stand for it? There are 50,000 of us, gentlemen. Are we yelping coyotes or are we men? The speaker paused, that his words might sink in. His audience answered with a yell, and then were hushed again. But after all, this liquor business is only a marker on the rest, only a token. Dominion Creek hillsides is where Pooh Bah, our own octopus's own Man Friday, has got in his fine work. Orders came from Ottawa that these claims were to be thrown open, and posters were printed and stuck up saying the time was July 14th. Then, when the 12th came round, somebody finds a mistake was made, and the proper date is the 12th. We rush the creek, gentlemen, and stake. What? Nothing. We get nothing. There are 50,000 of us, gentlemen, and every man has 2 rifles and a shotgun. Are we going to stand for it? No, was the general shout. We've all been over the passes and we've run chances, big chances. Most of us have had a handshake with death, cold, grimy death. Can't we shake hands once again? Are we men or only mangy malamoots? He paused, but there was no cheer at this moment. They were all too eager for him to continue. What is our situation, gentlemen? Look at our situation. We're 2,000 miles from nowhere, and those 2,000 miles are mountains, snow and glaciers. Talk about Napoleon's retreat from Moscow. That was just a game of ping-pong compared to marching an army across country from back east to the Yukon. Just a little lallygag. The White Pass and the Chilkoot Pass and the mouth of the Yukon belong to Uncle Sam. At the mention of Uncle Sam, a great cheer went up, a mighty shout. Uncle Sam! Hurrah for Uncle Sam! He won't tax our gold. No, no, gentlemen, the Republic of the North. A Republic of the North. We can work out the mines before trouble can come to us, said the speaker. The Klondike Free State! The Klondike Free State! Shouted a man. The crowd took up the cry. Chaos reigned. John Berwick, who had pushed his way through the crowd, sprang upon the bar beside Joseph Andrews, the orator. He raised his hand for silence. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 23. Revolution. Is a man's life to be mere existence, breathing, and the eating of food with hours of repose? Or is it to be striving after some ideal, whether of ambition or duty? Strife, surely. Man spends his life in toil. The results of his labour represent his life. Imagine for one moment that we are standing upon Dawson's Dome. The audience began to cough and shuffle. This exordium was unusual. The men seemed restless, and then, as if with a unanimous impulse, they appeared to settle to attention. John went on. We turn our faces to the north, and view a mass of gorgeous colouring, the shield of the day that is past, and the herald of the day that is to come. To the south and east and west this beauty is reflected in blended tints, sinking into valleys purple and silent. Whence came these valleys? They mark the erosion of ages. As a day is to 1,000 years, so is the life of man on earth to the time the hand of God has been at work carving the original plane. And what are the fruits of his labour? One of them is gold. Gold that you and I may win. During the ages when the land where most of us were born was under ice, the work went on. The rains fell and flowed to the sea, and out of all those ages of preparation and waiting one result appears to us, and that is gold. There was an interruption or two, but the bulk of the audience clamoured for silence and got it. God is just. He who robs a man of the results of his labour is a murderer to this extent that he takes a portion of his realised life. I need not remind you, my friends, of our labours in reaching this land, and the sacrifices we have made. Some of us have mortgaged our homes, even sold our all to make this effort. Many of us have spent the best years of our adult life in this quest of nature's treasure, and in the hour of consummation have been robbed, robbed of our efforts. The result of those years has been torn from us, callously, brutally. Such corruption can only be remedied in one way. Thou shalt not kill is the divine decree. "But we have to get justice!" There came from the audience words of earnest agreement. The harangue of Joseph Andrews had awakened the frenzy of the crowd. The tones and the serious presence of John Berwick appealed to their minds, while his argument wakened the thought of moral right, and, far better than rhetoric could do, steeled their resolves. John told simply, briefly, the history of gold mining in Australia, and of the many times corruption had wrecked individual fortunes. Justice, primarily, had to do with the rights of the individual. Countless lives had been lost in the past ages to establish that principle. The conditions in the Klondike were now worse than any that had troubled Australia. But there, as in the Klondike, the distance between the mining fields and the seat of government had been too great, and modes of communication too slow, to bring effective remedies. The agents of betterment found the diggings depleted, and the wrongs complained of now irreparable. But there need not be any shedding of blood, that fact he emphasised. What they must do was organise, and so win thousands to their cause against the hundreds under the orders of the established and ineffective authorities. "But we need a head, a strong heart to rule," John was saying. "You're the man!" a voice shouted. "You're the man!" 100 echoed. "Parson Jack! Parson Jack! I knew he had something in him!" Through the uncertain light John could distinguish Long Shorty. So it happened that Berwick became the head of the revolutionists. As he sprang down from the bar the excited men crushed round him. He whispered a rendezvous to a dozen of the most eager. "Dawson's Dome, to-morrow, noon." That night Smoothbore paced his room. The scandal of the Dominion Creek hillsides was known to him, and he speculated on its being the last straw on the back of that patient camel, the honest prospector. There was a knock on the door. He told the newcomer to enter. It was Sergeant Galbraith in civilian clothes. "There was a meeting in the Borealis to-night, sir. Joseph Andrews was talking." "Did he say much?" "A little more than usual, sir." "Did he stir them up?" "They did a lot of yelling." "They always do when he talks. Anything else?" "There was another speaker, sir." "Who?" "Don't know, sir." "But you have charge of the Secret Service. You placed a man on his trail?" "Yes, sir. Constable Hope." "What did the stranger say?" "He talked philosophy." "Philosophy!" "Yes, he's an Australian." "Did he rouse them?" "They did not say much. He held them quiet." "Any sedition?" "Yes, sir. He says the man who steals another man's work is a murderer, in that he takes a portion of his life, and he quoted the Bible." The sergeant saluted and retired. Smoothbore paced his room. A man who could silence a Dawson crowd, one who quoted the Bible, was a man to be watched. Smoothbore knew his duty. It was to his sovereign and his sovereign's authority. It was in his province to maintain the integrity of his sovereign's empire. He knew that many of his men sympathised with the miners, and that the miners were conscious of this sympathy. He knew also that many of the miners believed, in the case of an uprising of the people, that the opposition of the police would be merely nominal. The question, what action he should take, had been facetiously asked him many times, but he had allowed no man to read his mind. The iniquities of the liquor permit system were known to him, for in his official capacity he had to enforce the law. The rascality in the Gold Commissioner's office, and the graft of the toll bridge and the Bonanza Creek trail, all were known to him, and were bad, thoroughly bad. Villainy, barefaced or subtle, permeated officialdom, but officialdom he must protect. There was no real hesitancy, although he recognised both sides of the question. He was going to do his duty, and he knew that his men would follow him. 20 men were present on the Dome at the time appointed. No one had marked their coming, and it would not have mattered if they had. Men often climbed the Dome to spy out the land, or to locate the timber that grew upon its sides, for it would soon be winter, and logs were already being cut and hauled. From the Dome all who were approaching could be seen. There were no walls with ears at that place. John moved a resolution that a council be formed, representative of the 4 nationalities, Australian, English, Canadian, and the United States. He and George would canvass the Australians in English. Hugh said he and Joseph Andrews would work among the Canadians. Long Shorty thought he could round up a host of Americans, and Frank Court said he would back him up. These were men who would form the council. The first thing to do was to canvass the town and find out how many could be won to the cause, after which another meeting would be held and progress reported. Following this, the creeks were to be gone over. To prevent bloodshed, the force must be overwhelming. Bonanza, Hunker, and El Dorado would probably not yield many helpers. These creeks had been staked before the advent of Poo Bah, and the police had given records. The owners had no complaint. Nothing more than moral support could be counted from these. But on the new creeks, Dominion, Sulphur, Indian River, Australia Eureka, Too Much Gold, All Gold, and the rest, there was little doubt that the support of thousands could be obtained. On the hillsides of Bonanza and Hunker, startling discoveries had recently been made. Gold Hill was proved enormously rich. Adams Hill, Magnet Hill, and Monte Cristo Hill were all of great potential wealth. The White Channel was being discovered, and the rights of location were hard to establish, if not impossible. In the gambling and dance halls, clerks of the Gold Commissioner's office were nightly to be seen squandering money on gambling and women. Their wage was $2 per day and food, yet many of them rather lived in the hotels at a cost of $15 per diem. All this explained the difficulty of obtaining record. The rightful owners of the newly discovered property were mostly residents of Dawson, employing lawyers in their attempt to obtain just rights. These men were the most desperate. Then there were the 40-mile, Glacier, and 12-mile creeks. There was a large number on Glacier and 40-mile creeks. The nature of the discussion was necessarily wide. John insisted that they should all devote attention to the town for the first few days. Each man gained as an adherent should be questioned as to his arms and ammunition, the capacity of his rifle, and the quantity of his ammunition. Notes were to be taken of these details. Only by such means could they estimate what might be expected from the men on the creeks. The need of caution was expressed by all on all. No word of what was doing should be allowed to reach the police, and every possible adherent must be carefully sounded ere he was taken into confidence. John tarried on the Dome after the meeting. He requested George, Frank, and Hugh to post to the home camp and prepare a meal. A tremendous responsibility had come to him in the last few hours, and now that action had been taken he wished to meditate upon it. He had taken a great step, and could only contemplate a result far-reaching. When the last man had disappeared among the timber below, he arose from his seat and wandered towards the wooded gulch to the north of the Dome, which he had partly explored in the days of his convalescence. He thought he remembered something. He found it again, a cleft in the rock. By the aid of a few poles and brush and a little moss it would become a fair habitation. His den! David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave Adullam. And every one that was in distress, and every one that was in debt, and every one that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him. Was he to be another David? He sought the home trail, and as he ate his meal told his companions that he would camp alone. No one else had better be with him in the cave of Adullam. That afternoon he placed an outfit on his back, and walked to his new lonely abode. Time was precious, so he would not allow any of his companions to assist him, but rather requested that they should turn immediately to their work of organisation. Besides, it was his humour to be alone. As he chopped the trees necessary to complete his den, his mind conceived many things. Fond recollections came, and they led to a contemplation of the purposes of his life. Was he ever to be useful, creative? Instinctively his mind avoided the immediate issue of events. After all, the time for thought had given place to the time for action. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 24. Within the Barracks. When Constable Hope had made his report upon Berwick's abiding place, and added to it particulars as to his visitors, and the council held on the Dome, Smoothbore recognised that he had to do with a man of more than ordinary character and intelligence. In the first place, a council held upon the Dome summit in broad daylight was not susceptible to eavesdropping. As a base of assault upon the town, a modern rifle might drop a bullet into the barrack yard. There were possibly 50,000 men against less than 200. As a matter of fact, 600 officers and men were on their way to the Yukon, via the Stikeen route, that is, if they had not got cold feet and turned back. In any case, such military outfits were of little good. Being a staunch believer in the police, Smoothbore had little faith in the militia. The report of the meeting on the Dome was to the effect that council had been held, and that the different parties attending it had immediately left town. Berwick's former residence had been abandoned, and its other occupants, who had been at the meeting, were not to be seen in any of the dance halls or gambling saloons. Crossing the quadrangle of the barracks from the orderly room towards his own private office, immediately after reading the report of Constable Hope, Smoothbore met Inspector Herbert, the officer of the day. Smoothbore returned the other's salute and stopped, which brought Herbert to a standstill also, and then, glancing over his shoulder at the Dome towering behind the town, inquired, "Herbert, how would you like leading a squad of men against a trenched position on the top of the Dome?" "The only way a man could storm that position would be by flying machine, and they're not invented yet. But you might cut off the enemy's supplies, that is, if you had enough men, or their water. There is no water except in the draw at the back. Were you thinking of having some manoeuvres, sir?" "Manoeuvres may be made necessary by the dread realities of war." Herbert opened his eyes wide and looked at his chief. Smoothbore did not return his gaze. He was still looking intently at the top of the hill, where he could see a flagstaff and the figure of a man. Herbert followed his gaze, noted the human figure, and made to take his military glasses from their case, but his superior checked him. "Don't look up there with your glasses. Someone may have his on us." "You don't mean that you seriously fear an insurrection?" Herbert then exclaimed. "That these dirty prospectors will show fight?" Herbert had a contempt for the populace similar to that of Louis XV. Smoothbore turned to him. "There are as many known murderers in Dawson as there are mounted police in the whole of the Yukon. On that hill there is a man who quotes Scripture, can probably string out his pedigree to the Conquest, and propounds the doctrine that the man who steals another's substance steals that portion of his life which went to the acquiring of that substance. This is a dangerous doctrine, because it makes our grafters murderers. The great majority of his followers will absorb this doctrine without question. Every one of the discontented is ready to lay the responsibility of his non-success on the shoulders of the officials. God knows we have real grafting and grafters enough; but if you would hear each separate tale of woe, or the different tales of woe that each malcontent will unburden himself of at the least excuse, and add the whole together, the sum would involve twice the number of claims at present made in the Yukon Valley. It does not matter that these injuries are many of them fancied. The effect upon the possessor of the delusion is the same. These men have encountered countless hardships on the trail. They have, many of them, staked their all in the venture. The hopes they encouraged within themselves as they struggled to the goal have given place to dejection. Now they find themselves at the end of their resources, and their ways are blocked by corruption. Can you not understand how little organized agitation will ferment rebellion?" "And they have abundant ammunition," commented Herbert, ever practical. "They brought a great supply with them, thinking to kill game on the way. They met little or none, and consequently have their ammunition unspent. Look in at any of the second-hand shops, and you will find numbers of the highest classes of modern rifles, with stacks of ammunition, on sale at half their original cost." "Then you really fear rebellion?" "Not fear, but I think rebellion is not improbable. Officers of the Mounted Police don't fear anything this side of the Great Divide," and the speaker smiled. "Would it not be well to arrest the ringleaders and nip the thing in the bud?" asked the inspector. "We have no charge to lay against them, except the voicing of sedition, and there is only one man who did so. And if we did arrest him no, it would not do. Besides, sedition, there are enough people voicing sedition within earshot of Whitehall to keep the prisons of England filled were they all arrested. It would be a hard thing to get a jury to convict on a charge of sedition." With this the Commandant continued his way to his office. Smoothbore sat at his desk and filled his pipe. His conversation with his inspector had not dispelled his apprehensions. Far from it. He must do something. He turned to the constable who was busy with papers at a neighbouring desk, and sent him for Sergeant Galbraith. In the meantime he sat and thought. There were few Canadians in the total population of the Yukon, while the English and Australians were the most bitter against the existing wrongs, and foremost in their utterances of protest. In due time Sergeant Galbraith entered and saluted. Smoothbore turned to him. "Constable Hope has not been able to find any trace of the associates of Berwick at their tent, nor in the dance halls?" "He has not, sir." "They appear to have left town. It is clear that they are organizing, which means trouble. What is Hope doing?" "Detailed to watch the Dome, sir." "You had better put another man on that job, and send Hope to the Forks, and on through to Dominion if needs be, to see if he can pick up any trace of these men, and if so to ascertain what they are doing. He might travel in plain clothes. It is possible he may give the appearance of being a likely recruit for the Klondike Free State." "Very good, sir." "Do you see any signs of organization?" "Nothing further, sir." "Well, have a look in at these second hand shops that have the most rifles and ammunition in stock, and size up what they have. Then you can see later if much is being sold. You might ask the proprietors to find out where the purchasers say they are going. The explanation for your questions will be that you understand there has been a new find made somewhere, and that you wish to ascertain where it is." "Very good, sir." There could be no doubt that if a number of rebels entrenched themselves on the summit of the Dome there would be no dislodging them, while they could drop bullets into any part of the town, including the police barracks. Smoothbore had small hopes of securing any number of recruits from the civilian population. No, the civilian population would take little hand in suppressing a rising. There was no end to be served by the police making the first move. They could only wait and watch, hoping for something to turn up. The humour of the malcontents might change. Some new distraction might spring up. The British Empire had been on the verge of collapse a score of times, but always something had happened to floor the prophets. He was quite ready to believe that the man at the head of the new movement, this John Berwick, was steadfast in his affection for the British Crown. Quite possibly his action in the matter grew out of his loyalty. And being right in this reflection goes to show how worldly wise the Police Commandant really was. That in a crisis such as was being developed he proved strong enough to lie low illustrates the moral and physical courage of the man. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of the Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 25. Recruiting. That Frank, Hugh and George had not returned to their tent the night after the council of war on the Dome was due to nothing more than the fact that they had gone to town with Long Shorty, and had stayed the night in his cabin. They did not appear in the saloons and dance halls because they had decided upon Baxter's Free Library as downtown headquarters. Hence it was that two astute policemen had made wrong deductions, and while Constable Hope was haunting the resorts on the creeks for them, they were actually in the heart of the metropolis. The selection of Baxter's Free Library was the result of the astuteness of Long Shorty. He knew the place. Only in Dawson would it have been worthy of the name of library, as the number of volumes was limited to a score or so. There were also several newspapers there, which, though thumbed and scrawled upon and tattered, were the latest the camp contained. Access to these newspapers and books was free, the revenue of the establishment being derived from a lunch counter. As the building was located one street back from that which ran along the water front, the rent paid was comparatively small, and the proprietor was able to serve a roll and a cup of coffee for 50 cents, and a plate of stew made of bully beef or pork and beans for $1.50, which was about 33% cheaper than fashionable prices. The combination of comparatively cheap food and free reading drew to Baxter's many of those who had ample time upon their hands, with little or no money in their pockets, and who were unwilling or unable to perform the heavy labour of mining operations on the creeks. They were of the educated and semi-educated classes, and among their motley members Long Shorty guessed that many desperate characters might be found. A winter, the most severe in which white people lived, would be upon them in a few short months. The plan of campaign decided upon was that each of the four conspirators should enter the reading room, engage in reading, and gradually draw possible recruits into conversation, which in free and easy Dawson would not be difficult to do. Long Shorty was not long in picking out his man. He seemed the ordinary type of prospector, well set up and muscular. His dress was of good quality, by which it was to be inferred that his outfit would be large, and in all probability would include a rifle or two with ammunition. He was reading a copy of Shakespeare. Long Shorty sat beside him and picked up a copy of the Bible. Bibles and the works of William Shakespeare were the most common volumes in Dawson in the summer of '98. Long Shorty turned over the pages, read a verse, then put down the book and sighed. "Well, stranger," he said, "what do you think of things?" "Damned bad." "They sure are. But what are you going to do about it?" "Just about the same as the rest, get out of the country as soon as I can. Isn't that what you're going to do?" "I guess so, after I've made my pile." "Well, if you can get away with a pile, I reckon you'll have to make two, one for yourself and one for the grafters." "There may be a change." "You must have been listening to the fellow down at the Borealis the other night." "Perhaps I was," said Long Shorty significantly. "And you think those fellows will ever do more than talk?" "Well, you know how many police there are, and how many there are of the others. The police are armed with old Winchesters, 20 years behind the times. Looks like the insurrectos might have a chance if they got together and had ammunition and rifles." "There are lots of both among the crowd, I guess. I have a .303 and 1,000 cartridges. That is 5 shots for every policeman in the country." He spoke with some bitterness. Long Shorty rightly concluded that here was a spirit who only wanted a leader. To make doubly sure, he thought he would draw him a little, and see how much real mutiny was in his heart. So he said, "But there are the claim owners, grafters, and other civilians who might aid the police." "Not much. The claim owners wouldn't, except possibly those who got their holdings through Poo Bah. The fellows who got their claims straight would know a new government would do them more good than harm." The speaker then, as if tired of politics, pointedly went on with his reading. His mind was absorbing the philosophy of the melancholy Jacques. Long Shorty's sensibilities were not of the finest, and he refused to consider the conversation closed, so he asked the direct question. "What would you do if the boys got up?" "Nothing. I'd do nothing. It's no use considering it. I'm off down the river on a steamer leaving to morrow. I'm going to work my way as a wood passer to St. Michael's, after which I'll trust to luck for getting to 'Frisco. But if the boys are really going to rise, they have my good wishes. I tried to sell my rifle to day, and the best offer I could get was $5, and I told the fellow I'd chuck it into the Yukon first. If you're going to stay, I'll make you a present of it, to be given to the boys if they want it." The man was going home. Long Shorty felt there was no use in attempting to hold him, so he answered in such a manner as to accept the offer, and yet not compromise himself. He said, "I don't mind taking the rifle and the cartridges and holding them in case things do happen, though I may be away on the creeks at the time." "All right, I'll leave them with Baxter here. You can call for them to morrow." Again he returned to the Forest of Arden, and Long Shorty permitted the conversation to close. In the meantime the other three had been hard at work. George met one Australian whose sentiments were so pronounced that he quickly closed with him, and as the recruit knew several others in the library, the agitation made good progress. It was agreed by the reformers and the new recruits that they should all meet later in the day at Lookout Point, which was the angle of the Klondike Bluffs, where the valley of the Klondike met that of the Yukon. In later years a seat and a flagstaff were erected there, and it became a favourite trysting place for young men and maidens engaged in another quest than that of gold. This arrangement settled, George set off to report to Berwick, while the others, still looking for more of the rightly disaffected, drifted into the different saloons. Berwick was delighted at their present success, and was eager to meet the party at Lookout Point. He felt that if so many adherents could be gained by such a small canvas, 3,000 or 4,000 devoted armed men at least could be recruited from Dawson and its environs. The outlook was hopeful. Chapter 26 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 26 Located. In due course, that is 3 or 4 days afterwards, Constable Hope returned from the creeks with the report that there was no trace to be found of the allies of John Berwick. To Smoothbore this was not evidence of any abandonment of the conspiracy. He was convinced that Berwick meant business. There was, besides, a strange quietude reigning over Dawson. So mercurial a population could not have let its excitement subside and disappear in that short time. On the other hand, Inspector Herbert was confident enough to be facetious at the expense of the enemies of officialdom. When Smoothbore told him that Hope's expedition had no result, he said, I thought as much. You'll find the reputed leader has some fool theory of the origin of gold, and is camped on the Dome to receive inspiration, while his followers have slipped off down the river for the good of their healths." "Perhaps," replied Smoothbore, as he glanced at the Dome, "perhaps," and they parted. "The old man is a bit locoed on this rebellion theory," mused Herbert as he went along. "It's strange in a man who has seen so much service, and with him it is not nerves." Just then Herbert happened to glance up at the Dome. By Jove, what a position for a couple of Maxims! 100 men could stand off 10,000. I wonder. There are thousands of men starving, with many too proud to beg, and little to spare even for them. What would a successful revolution mean? For one thing, it would establish a multitude of openings in the new civil service, with chances of graft. It would mean a new police force or militia, perhaps both, the members of which would at least be fed. It is not a case so much of righting wrong as of getting for these fellows a piece of the pumpkin. Taking that view of it, it looks serious. What if the old man were right? Such were the thoughts that flashed through Herbert's mind. Almost within a minute after Smoothbore had left him, he was wavering in his opinions. Now he was striding in pursuit of him. "Well, what do you think we had better do about it?" asked the Commandant, after he had heard the changed opinions of his inspector. "Arrest the leaders." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the office door, which was followed by the entrance of Constable Hope, quite in a fluster. "I have located Berwick's friends, sir," he reported. "In fact, he was with them when I spotted them. They were all in Baxter's Free Library, and they are up to something. Berwick sits reading the Bible, and every now and then one of his aides de camp comes up and whispers in his ear, and then goes away again to begin opening conversation with some pilgrim. I sat down, thinking one of them might come to me with his talk, but no results, sir." "Well, now you have them located, take 2 good men in plain clothes and point the gang out to them. In fact, you might take 4, so that henceforth they can be easily traced. Detail 1 man to Berwick and 2 to the others." "Good man, that," remarked Herbert, when Hope had left their presence. "Yes, it would be a pity to have him in the army." "My guess seems to have been wrong as to the movements of the gang." Smoothbore made no comment on this, but asked, "Would you arrest them now?" "Yes." "I am afraid I must still disagree with you," was the Chief's answer, and Herbert shortly after went away. Constable Hope collected together 4 of his comrades, told them to dress in civilian clothes, and follow him. They did so, and joined the crowd in Baxter's. In due time the 4 policemen had registered in their memory the features of John Berwick and his followers. Constable Hope then told off 3 men according to instructions, and with the remaining policeman left the place. "Who are those fellows?" asked the constable who accompanied Hope. "Berwick is the prospective liberator of the oppressed and downtrodden miner. He can talk on occasions. In fact, I heard him and nearly determined to jump my uniform." "What do they propose to do?" "Send the police down the river and set up for themselves." "Cheerful for us. Do you think they will make the effort?" "Smoothbore seems to take them seriously, and I think Herbert is coming to think the same way." "What will Smoothbore do?" "Stand pat. What else would he do? What would you or I do?" And Constable Hope looked at his companion in a manner not complimentary. "The outfit would surely get licked in the end." "To be sure they would; but in the meantime 2 years how much could you graft in 2 years?" This query admitted of no reply, and lacking a further word from his companion, Constable Hope continued, "50 miles, 10 hours on the river, and you're in the land of Uncle Sam. See?" "Yes, I see. If you think over it a bit, you will see more." "Yes, I guess my vision would enlarge. And you say Smoothbore is only standing pat?" "I do." "Funny." "It's not funny. It's the only thing to do. They've not begun to mass their forces yet. When they do, we might have some evidence." Shortly after Hope and Inspector Herbert had left Smoothbore, Sergeant Galbraith knocked at the office door and reported. "I've looked into the second hand shops and sized up their ammunition. Rosenbaum on 2nd Street reports considerable buying lately, and so does Hobson on 3rd Avenue. In fact, sir, they appeared to be somewhat excited. The Jew thought there was a strike up the Klondike, and the Cockney thought there must be a stampede up the Stewart." "Perhaps these stories may be right." "No, sir, I think not. The town patrol reported to day 2 fellows in from Wind City, sir, on the Edmonton trail, and I looked them up. They had not met any fellows going up the Stewart, that is, any number worth mentioning." "Then this looks like corroborative evidence. At least the trouble is reaching such a stage as to make it advisable to get on the defensive. Also, we must let the men know what seems likely to happen. Have the town patrol keep their eyes on all men carrying rifles." "Very good, sir." "Report direct to me anything that appears of interest." "Yes, sir." "And, Sergeant, what about those fellows who arrived from Edmonton?" "They were in a very bad state, sir. Of their party of 14, they were the only survivors. They wintered at Wind City, got scurvy, and all died but 4, and of the 4 these 2 only remain. The other 2 were drowned in a rapid." "Poor fellows. That will do, Sergeant." Smoothbore was left to his recollections and general musings. Gold! Gold! The price that is paid for it. 50,000 men in this stampede, 250,000 people affected, homes devastated, affections torn asunder, hundreds dead by scurvy or drowning, thousands with constitutions wrecked. The gold is not worth the candle, with the trusts betrayed and morals twisted. It is not worth it. Look at this little Yukon district remote from the world. Our genesis was of gold. It would seem our dissolution will be through the same agent. The love of gold, that it may command luxury, is a source of overwhelming evil. It feeds our vices. That is pretty well all that can be said of this insensate greediness. But this is not practical," he continued, moving. "I must give orders that the men pay special attention to their rifles and side arms." And he went off at once to the orderly office. The time had come for every preparation to be made. The Commandant considered the position. There was no scope for fortifying the barracks. The buildings were of logs. Loopholes could be made by the simple process of pushing a rifle barrel through the mortar. The main thing was that the police should appear to be unconscious of the movement on foot. One action he determined upon, and that was the purchase of the best rifles and ammunition in the shops. This to be accomplished by secret agents. This was not entirely intended to keep arms from Berwick's men, for the enemy would still have enough ammunition to exterminate the police force. But the arms of the police were not modern. Chapter 27 of the Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 27. The Woodpile. The woodpile was an institution almost as famous with the underworld as Dawson itself. From St. Michael's to Frisco, and up and down the Yukon River, its reputation held. At the mention of its name, the pale and sickly faces of the vicious became still paler and more sickly, when they did not flush with angry hatred. The woodpile was the prison, called so because the inmates, given hard labour, worked out their debt to society by sawing wood. In cold winter weather, the winter of the subarctic, with the thermometer 40 degrees below zero, the process was no joke. The great majority of the prisoners were United States citizens, in the souls of whom many 4ths of July had engendered a contempt for the British uniform. To be herded by a yellow leg with a rifle and made to saw wood to keep the oppressor warm was a circumstance that rankled. 5 Ace Dan, called for brevity's sake 5 Ace, was on the woodpile. One day 5 Ace was taking a hand in a poker game, and by some mischance one of the other players detected him extracting a card from his sleeve, and charged him with the offence. There was of course a row, whereupon 5 Ace drew a revolver and pointed it at his adversary with the words, adorned with some special expletives, "If I had you across the line I'd fill you full of holes." Whereat the man addressed came back with the words, uttered with a leer and a hiss, "But we ain't, see?" 5 Ace was surely in hard luck, for a policeman heard the noise of the row and quickly gathered him in. Smoothbore gave him 3 months on the woodpile, with a blue ticket at the end of that term. A blue ticket meant that the authorities requested the recipient to leave the country, an invitation rarely not taken advantage of. But 5 Ace was serving his term in the summer months, when fuel was not a pressing necessity, and the number of prisoners was large. The stock employment of the gang was drawing gravel from the banks of the Yukon and carrying it in barrows to the quadrangle of the barracks, or the road bed of the main street. While climatic conditions were infinitely better during the summer months than they were in winter, this was not an unmixed blessing to Five Ace. For while the winter months were dark and drear and cold, the coldness, darkness, and dreariness, together with the abundance of clothing it was necessary for the prisoners to wear, made it hard for their persons to be recognized by passers by. On the other hand, during the bright summer days, the situation was very embarrassing, and it is easy to believe that any one holding strong ideas on the rights of man, a true citizen, that is to say, of the United States, so imprisoned, was ready for any desperate venture. If it came to the killing of a yellow leg or two, what matter? There were no greater or more glorious people on God's green earth than the citizens of the United States. Five Ace was quite ready to pose as a hero and martyr when opportunity served. Long Shorty happened to be a friend of Five Ace Dan. Not that he consorted with tin horns, but Dan hadn't always been what he was now, and anyway there wasn't much harm in pulling off a trick once in a while. The officials in this country were always robbing people, so why should not he put in a hand? One day, as Long Shorty was prospecting for recruits, he recognized Five Ace among the gang employed in the gravel pit, and, quick as a flash, the idea came that it would be well to have an ally among the prisoners. How to get into communication with Five Ace was a matter demanding consideration. It would not do to make a mess of things through any little mistake at the beginning. So he walked away, pondering, and sat down and reviewed the situation from afar. In other words, he watched the prisoners and noted their movements. There were about 8 in this particular band, over whom stood a policeman. The process was for the prisoners to file down to the shore of the river, fill their barrows, and march back again. Each man returned to the spot he had left and picked up the tools he had been working with. The best means to get a word with Five Ace was by means of a note, provided the note did not fall into the hands of the police. Long Shorty soon came to his decision. The note must not be compromising. This is what Long Shorty wrote: "The marmot has generally 2 entrances to his burrow, the yellow leg has only 1. Some day soon something is going to happen, but in the meantime the hunters with rifles would like to know if the yellow legs are wise to the game. Where the seed is sown, there will the flower grow, and I expect response to this where I sow it. At dinner hour I will look for it." After setting down this on a piece of paper, Long Shorty, not a little proud of his achievement, rumpled it up with another piece of blank paper and enclosed a small piece of lead pencil. This was because prisoners were not always allowed paper and pencil. After the little parcel was ready, Long Shorty walked downstream to where there was a canoe belonging to a man he knew. He borrowed the craft and began poling upstream towards the mouth of the Klondike. He had noted that the site of Five Ace's labour was very near the river, so that when he passed the spot he could have stepped on the tools with which the convict worked. A labourer toiling with pick and shovel first loosens the soil with the pick and then uses the shovel. The astute mind of Long Shorty conceived that if he dropped the paper close to where the hand of the toiler, as he grasped the shovel, would be, events would work out. As they did. Five Ace, on returning with the empty barrow, took up his pick and began to work, and while he was scratching the ground in the leisurely manner of the convict, his eye saw the paper. He judged that its appearance was possibly connected with Long Shorty, who was hanging about watching. So, with the slyness proper to his fraternity, he took up the shovel and managed to smuggle and hide away the parcel by slipping it down his neck. When Five Ace had an opportunity he read the missive, and his breast swelled. Here was evidently an invitation for him to join a rising against the oppressors. If successful, it would mean that an honest fellow could shoot down a blackleg and get away. Judge Lynch would sit in the Yukon. By all means things must be kept quiet. Five Ace felt sure he could get the other prisoners to turn against their guard when the proper time came. One man might get shot, but if he were careful it need not be himself. Long Shorty had the idea that Five Ace Dan and his fellow prisoners might, in the case of a rising outside, carry out some portion of a general move by striking a blow within. On the other hand, while Five Ace believed he was the child of a race of patriots, and felt himself a champion of liberty with a possibility of shining before posterity, his first and foremost idea was always his own liberty. He wrote a note and left it as directed, where Long Shorty secured it, and this is what it said: "The beaver is working with no thought of danger. If his dam is broken in spots, he will fix it. To drive him out you must make a clean job. You have friends who will help, but you must keep them posted." Five Ace had evidently the same ideas as the leader of the insurrection, that a sudden display of force, thousands strong, would make the position at the barracks untenable and force a surrender. The following day Long Shorty replied, "Many years ago the south face slid off the Dome, and many Injuns went to the happy hunting grounds. Some day something might slide off the Dome, and keep on going till it hits the barracks and bumps it into the Klondike. I will look out for things that are to happen, so that those in the barracks will know what to prepare for. In case they can help, I will let them know." All of which duly fell into the hands of Five Ace Dan, and conveyed to him the true situation of affairs. Had it fallen into those of the police, it would have appeared as mere nonsense, the scribbling of some prospector whose hardships had affected his reason. That is what Long Shorty thought. Chapter 27. Chapter 28 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 28. A Council of War. Within a few days 1,500 men in Dawson had signified their readiness to act for a new government. Another 1,000 could readily be counted upon from the creeks. 2,500 well armed and determined men, entrenched at the top of the Dome, could withstand an army. To attack them, armed as they were with long range sporting rifles, would be, on the part of the police, madness. It was noon on a Saturday when Long Shorty left his last note to Five Ace Dan on the Yukon gravel bar. Having satisfied himself that the missive had fallen into the proper hands, he set out for the Dome to report. He found Berwick, Hugh Spencer, Bruce, Court, and several others holding a council of war. Berwick was giving instructions. Behind the Dome, you will notice, is a valley where the timber is comparatively heavy. Our men can camp there with 2 weeks' provisions. Every man, or 2 men, will be their own commissariat. Their instructions will be to hold themselves in readiness while recruits are being gathered from the creeks. "Recruits! We don't want no recruits from the creeks!" roared Long Shorty. 1,500 men will fix the thing." Hugh agreed with this. 1,500 men should be able to scare less than 200 into surrender, especially when we can show them that we can shoot and be out of range of their rifles. Berwick put the matter to the vote, and it was agreed that the 1,500 to be recruited from Dawson would be sufficient. Berwick sighed. "Very good, 1,500 let it be, but we must try to avoid bloodshed. This affair will be serious enough without anybody being killed. Pass the word for a muster right away. Camps to be made in the woods as if a base for prospecting. At the camps rifles may be cached to be quickly available. It is possible the police may not notice the migration, but we must chance that. Until it is time to act, the men will go into town every day as usual." "Don't you think we had better have a preliminary muster?" asked George. "Yes, it would serve a double purpose, give an opportunity to our men to learn the plans, and the massing of so many upon the Dome would doubtless lead to inquiries by the police, and probably impress them with our display of force. It's hardly possible they will make arrests, and they can hardly shoot unarmed men." "It won't do 'em any harm to show we look like meaning business. Why not have the boys bring their arms?" asked Long Shorty. "I'd say nothing about arms," Hugh counselled. "Let each man suit himself. There'll be enough guns in the crowd to guard against accidents." "And what are we to do after our display of force?" asked Long Shorty. "Send a letter to the barracks, calling on the officer commanding to surrender," answered John Berwick. "If he does not surrender? Suppose he tells you to go to the devil?" "We'll give him till Saturday to consider it." "And then, if he says no?" "He won't say no. He is a humane man, and must know we are in the right. He must also be aware that we can annihilate him." Berwick did not quite possess the assurance he showed in this reply. There might be such a thing as Smoothbore being willing to die at his post. Of late this idea had been more and more gaining hold on his mind. His sleep had become more restless as the time for action approached. In all probability some irresponsible person would make a slip which would precipitate matters. Dark thoughts and doubts came upon him, as they must at times to every leader who holds under his control many lives. But resolutely he put them from him, and comforted his heart, strengthened his determination by remembering the wrongs they had suffered and the righteousness of their cause. He hoped earnestly that Smoothbore would recognise that his force was outnumbered by at least 10 to 1. But Long Shorty was tenacious. Possibly he thought he detected some wavering in his leader, and so he persisted. "But what if he does call the bluff?" "In that case we must hold a council of war and determine what to do. Our display of force on Wednesday should make him apprehensive. By Friday our intentions and strength must have impressed him. Then we shall forward him a summons to surrender. If by Saturday noon he has not complied—" "We'll drop a few bullets round the flagpole," cried Long Shorty, "and it would not do much harm if we peppered a yellow leg or two." "I'd rather they got one of the grafters," said a recruit, to which remark others chorused, "Hear, hear!" "We'll see, we'll see. What we need first is to get our forces camped in the woods. So pass the word among our adherents that they are expected to gain their encampment during Monday and Tuesday. Let Sunday be a day of rest. It's possible the Sunday after may be far from peaceful." "All right, boss," spoke up Frank. Frank was far more loyal to Parson Jack, much less inclined to question him, than Long Shorty. "That ends this present business," said John. "Those of you who don't wish to go into town may as well stay and go over the ground in survey of a line of entrenchment." Thereupon, with his friends about him, John went to his den and secured a pick and shovel hidden there, and with them traced a furrow, to be enlarged later. The riflemen would lie there and fire upon the barracks. To this day that furrow is to be found across the top of the dome. Dawson was now at the zenith of its prosperity. Not only had the Creeks produced many millions, but vast sums of outside capital were being paid for speculative claims, as well as for properties of proven worth. For those who were prosperous it was a heyday of delight. To those whose fortunes had stuck it was no heyday. It was for these that Berwick and his comrades were working, to give honest workers something of a fair chance, though there was a long span between the idealism of John and the motives of Long Shorty, which were not a little selfish and sordid. There have been many popular outbursts in the world's history, but never had a leader entered his fortunes against an established government with the chances of success held by Berwick. In numbers, in arms and equipment he had the advantage. His hesitation was therefore not due to any shirking of the issue. He was the reverse of a moral coward, and yet he felt keenly the responsibility and unpleasantness of the part he had to play in leading a force against the authority of Britain's Queen. It was duty which drove him against his patriotic instincts. He loathed the necessity, but there was no alternative if wrongs were to be righted. The 5 colleagues had been thoughtfully watching Dawson, that hive of human bees. The first to break the silence was Long Shorty, when he told of his acquaintance with 5 Ace Dan on the woodpile, and added the suggestion that he might prove useful. This roused Hugh, who said sharply, "We don't want any jail birds." "He's a bit of a tin horn," protested Shorty, "but he ain't a jail bird." "There ain't much difference," was Hugh's retort. Long Shorty held his peace. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29 of the Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 29 Stony Ground. Constable Hope had no doubts. Professional instinct told him there was an important conspiracy hatching. He was ambitious, and he loved his work, so that every impulse prompted him to find and follow the threads of the plot. Smoothbore's action in keeping tab on the number of men carrying rifles suggested to him that his commandant regarded the situation as serious. Therefore, beyond his orders, which were sufficient in themselves to work off an ordinary policeman's superfluous energy, Hope worked overtime. He discovered that George, Hugh and Frank occupied the home ranch once more, and were extremely busy. He reasoned that if a man's business be legitimate, it is easy to learn its nature. As the business of these men was not quite evident, he determined to find out what it was. So that on the morning of the meeting at the Dome, Hope had made his way there also, by a detour to the east. His route was the longer, and the sun was hot. Also, the trail he took led through some patches of swamp, which meant mosquitoes. When he reached the nearest point to the Dome, where he could remain under cover of the bush, he was still out of earshot. He watched those who came in view, but because the council had been seated in a circle about the summit, after the manner of the Indian powwow, and he was below the level of that summit, he could see only some of those who had attended. After the meeting had dissolved, and those remaining had plotted out their entrenchments and started to return to Dawson, Hope made bold to follow them. He drew back in time to avoid discovery from the 5 who still were gazing thoughtfully upon the town. But he happened to hear the reference to 5 Ace Dan and the wood pile. "They're camped on our trail. 5 Ace would hardly be in demand for a prayer meeting," thought the guardian of the peace, as eventually he returned to the police barracks. He at once reported to Sergeant Galbraith. "The big Tyee held a council of war on the summit at noon to day. These fellows are sure up to something." "Hear anything?" "No, could not get near enough, except at the last, when the big Yankee said something about 5 Ace Dan." "Who's he?" asked Galbraith. "The tin horn on the wood pile for pulling a gun. Well, the Yankee said something about his helping their cause or something, and the one they call Hugh said he had no use for tin horns. It looks as if the Yankee might be in communication inside the barracks." "Well, he wouldn't learn much." "He might tell them how poor are our arms." "They know that already," Galbraith snorted. "And how weak our guard is." "They know that too. That's the reason of this insurrection, or one of the reasons. But what has a reference to 5 Ace Dan got to do with this plot that's supposed to be going on?" "Nothing, I guess. Probably nothing." "Well, the only thing you have to report is that there was a powwow on the Dome this morning." "I guess so." "But whether they were planning to put us all out of business, or organizing an expedition to the North Pole, you don't know." "That's right." "Well, keep your eye on them, but don't report again until your report is calculated to make a noise." Constable Hope, not a little discouraged by the way his report was received, sauntered out and drifted towards the Borealis. The seeds of his effort had fallen on stony ground. But after he was gone, Sergeant Galbraith expanded his chest, drew up to the full extent of his 6 feet, and gazed through the door of his office at the muskeg, which did duty for a street. "Another council at the top of the Dome," he said to himself. He stood a minute, stroked his moustache, then, his mind made up, strode out of the office, and in due course was in the presence of his commanding officer. "Another council at the Dome, sir," he reported. "Yes. Seems serious, sir, when men climb 1,800 feet, this hot weather, that they may talk in private." "Any other signs, Sergeant?" "It's the other signs that make it look serious. The number of men carrying rifles is increasing rapidly. Yesterday no less than 300 rifles were seen in the streets." "Did you question any of those carrying them?" "No, sir. Had no orders, sir." "Just so. It would not have done any good, and it might have done harm. And you have had all supplies bought up, arms and ammunition?" "All that were better than our own, sir." "Well, have them secretly brought to the men's quarters, and let each man have his pick. Then some of the best shots can have a day off to practise a bit." "Very good, sir." "Something is going to happen soon," said Smoothbore to Herbert, who during the interview had come in. "Rather suggestive of Micawber, that, if you will pardon my saying so," Herbert ventured to assert. He had been a sudden and complete convert to the theory that trouble was brewing. The inaction of his chief had been getting on his nerves. "Micawber had the great virtue of patience," answered Smoothbore with a smile. "I would arrest the leaders, sir, on a trumped up charge, and get the evidence out of them that way." "That would be a mistake, my dear Herbert." "Perhaps so, sir; but here they can shoot us down like rats. If we have to die, we had better die like men." "If something does not turn up, as, you remind me, Micawber might have said, you will have sufficient opportunity to die." "I should wish to sell my life pretty dearly, sir." "Perhaps you won't have to sell it at all, if the something happens that I expect." "What do you expect, sir, may I ask?" "Just something," and Smoothbore smiled again. After a pause he continued. "By all the laws of military and political science, the British Empire should have been wrecked ages ago. But something always has happened. To arrest the leaders of this conspiracy would, I am sure, be an error. It would precipitate matters and undoubtedly cause bloodshed. You must remember it is not with redskins we are dealing. Many of these fellows who are arraying themselves against us are excellent shots, accustomed to rough life, and in every way calculated to make good fighters in such a country as this. If they really take up arms against us, there is nothing to do but fight to the death, sell our lives as dearly as possible, as you say. If they have no intention of taking up arms, and it is not yet certain that they will, we can suffer no harm by inaction. We might buy the leaders. A man who would sell himself and his friends would not stay bought, and somehow I do not feel that the integrity of the British Empire should be maintained by purchasing her enemies. But then there are our lives. Our lives don't figure in this proposition, and once again Smoothbore smiled. Herbert felt his chief was trifling with him and with the situation, so he rose from his chair, walked to the window, and looked out upon the quadrangle. This movement hid the flush of annoyance that had come over his face. He made an excuse, and found his way out of the office. "If only I were in command here," he thought, "I'd clap these fellows on the woodpile and then—" After that point no well-defined line of action suggested itself to him. Meanwhile Smoothbore continued writing his report to Ottawa, telling of his suspicions, and explaining his action, or want of action. He intended to hold back the communication until the last moment, until he was satisfied that something would not turn up, which would certainly be close to the crisis. Then he would confide it to a trusty scout and send it to the outside. While he was writing, his mind constantly played with the facts of his own position. It pleased him to compare it with that of Gordon in Khartoum, with these differences, that for him assistance was out of the question, and his enemies were not fanatical and were Christian. His would be a soldier's death, if something did not turn up. End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 30 On the Scent. After being snubbed by his sergeant, Constable Hope lost heart for a little while, but on the Sunday he was again working assiduously, with little luck. Accident and caution caused Berwick to keep out of the way of the determined policeman. Suddenly the idea of looking further into the possible connection of Five Ace Dan with the conspirators occurred to Hope. So on the day following his Sunday of ill success he posted himself near the prisoners. He could distinguish the person of Five Ace Dan, and watched closely for any sign made to a possible confederate, but without result. This was disappointing, for, brooding during the night on what Long Shorty had said, he brought himself to believe he was close to an important clue. As his inspection of Five Ace Dan brought no help to him, he felt again discouraged, and became sullen and brooding. Then his interest awoke again, for Long Shorty had appeared upon the scene. The constable was about to rise to his feet and abandon the enterprise when he saw the newcomer. He hid himself again immediately. He watched Long Shorty take a piece of paper out of his pocket and write. The man laboured hard over the missive. He was evidently no fluent scribe. The paper, after being finished and carefully read through, was rolled into a ball. At last, at stroke of noon, the prisoners filed back to the barracks. Long Shorty at once strolled over, with careful casualness, to the scene of their labours, and, as before, dropped the paper beside the handle of the Five Aces shovel. At once he went eager as a bird to Dawson. When the coast was quite clear, Hope came from his cover and annexed the letter. The policeman's spirits were very cock-a-whoop. "The eagle is very fond of yellow legs," he read in the awful scrawl, "and in 2 days' time a great many eagles will gather together about the summit of the big mountain, where they may watch the yellow legs; and if the yellow legs don't come and make peace within 2 days, then at the end of one more day the eagles will descend upon the yellow legs and make a meal of them. Any little dicky birds found among the yellow legs may go the same way, unless they make a move for liberty. The eagle loves liberty." Constable Hope pondered over these words, and after copying them into his notebook, replaced the original where he had found it. He then made his way to his sergeant and the midday meal. No sooner, however, had he come to Galbraith than he changed his mind. He would carry his news to the Commandant himself, and not waste it on this discouraging minor light. "You're somewhat glum. Seen a ghost?" asked the sergeant. "No, Sergeant, no." "Been drinking the wrong kind of hooch, I guess." "No, Sergeant, no." The first thing Hope did after lunch was to search the cell occupied by Five Ace Dan. There he found, stuffed between the logs which comprised one wall of the cell, the first missive written by Long Shorty. He searched, but could discover nothing else; but that would do. Off he went to the Commandant. "I have discovered something, sir, which I have thought sufficiently important to bring direct to you." "What is it?" "One of the men I am watching is communicating with a prisoner, Five Ace Dan. I heard him mention the name on the Dome on Saturday. To day I followed up the clue and intercepted a note." Constable Hope took out his notebook. He was a bit nervous and excited. He knew he was running a risk by not reporting, according to regulations, by way of the sergeant. Smoothbore was eyeing him intently. Constable Hope handed the letter found in the cell and his notebook containing the copy of the missive, left that morning, to the Commandant, who read them with stern eyes. "You think these are not the idle words of some partially demented prospector?" "I do not, sir. The big Yankee has nothing about him to indicate he has lost his wits." "So you think this is right, that there will be a massing of forces about the Dome on Wednesday?" "I do, sir." "And if there is a display of force on Wednesday, an attack will be made on Friday?" "On Saturday, sir." "On Saturday. Then if we see a massing of forces on Wednesday we may expect trouble by Saturday?" "That is my idea, sir." "What have you done with the original of the note you found to day?" "Put it where I found it, sir." "And what do you intend doing with the one you found in the prisoner's cell?" "I had thought to replace it, sir." "Very good. We can see if to day's note is hidden in the same place to morrow." Constable Hope was a proud man as he strode along the bank of the Yukon to the town. He had ventured much, and won. Visions of himself holding a commission passed through his mind. The possibility seemed more tangible now. Whom should he meet but the sergeant? "Well, young fellow, been hunting for more noiseless reports?" "I've been keeping my eyes open." "Seen anything?" "Nothing much to trouble you with, Sergeant." "Well, I've seen something I couldn't help but see. A stampede seems to have set in to the top of the Dome. Scores of fellows have been climbing up there, packs on their backs. You'd better join the crowd." "Not a bad idea." In 15 minutes Constable Hope had reached the town station, and made a roll of some blankets, in which he stowed several tins of bully beef and some biscuits. He was just setting out when his sergeant arrived. "Are not you going to take a rifle?" "I hadn't thought of doing so." "You'd better. All the others have rifles." "You didn't tell me." "Then I tell you now. No, not the police rifle," as Hope picked up a carbine. "Take this sporting rifle. Don't let him see you're a policeman, and use your wits." Hope strapped on his bundle, it weighed full 60 pounds, and with a "Goodbye, kid," from his sergeant, was off. He made a detour far up the Klondike to gain a more gradual ascent, and on the way did a powerful lot of thinking. The fact that many men were climbing the Dome was some foundation for the idea that a gathering was to take place there on Wednesday. He sat down to rest on the flat, or, as it was called in the diggings, bench, halfway up the Klondike bluffs. There was ample time, for it was still the season of perpetual light, and if he awaited, some other pilgrim would certainly come along, from whom he might find out something. Sure enough, a recruit to the forces of the rebellion came into sight before 5 minutes had passed. The man was heavily laden and struggling up the steep ascent. He clawed at the brush in his efforts to pull himself up, and when finally he succeeded, flung himself down by the side of the policeman, his face streaming with perspiration. "A fellow will need a fat job when things get righted to pay for this." "He sure will," said Hope. "I'm looking for a job collecting gold dust." "But there won't be any royalty then." That's right, that's right," and a thoughtful look came into the man's eye. "I was promised a job. I wonder what kind of job I can get. I really had made up my mind to hold out for a job collecting. It must be an all-fired good job if a fellow reckons on the dust these fellows who hold it now blow in on the girls and wine. 1 year would be enough for me. I'd save and quit the country." "Are you quite sure you'd save?" "Sure thing, I'm sure. At least I think I'm sure." Now, you don't think if you were given the job of collecting royalty that you might feel tempted to go to a restaurant, order a steak with Chechacho potatoes, and buy a bottle of wine to round things off?" The man gazed into vacancy a bit, and then looked Hope in the eye and slapped his knee as he said, "Do you know, partner, I think I might. If I get any boodle out of this thing that's coming off, I think I will. Beefsteak and onions and Chechacho potatoes. Gosh, what a layout of them I could eat right now. Beans, bacon and beans, and then beans and bacon. What a hell of a lot of fellow misses in this here country. Yes, but I'm afraid we will not be able to take our appetites with us. Say, I wonder what John D. Rockefeller would give for my appetite and my stomach. Say, I bet he'd give 1,000,000 cold cash. I bet he'd give 1,500,000, enough to buy the best claim on El Dorado." Perhaps, but never mind, there's a good time coming for us. Constable Hope did not wish the conversation to merge too much upon the abstract. "Yes, in 1 week more. Then we will have a chance to do some grafting, and I tell you I can do with some. Yes, sir." "You mean it will all be over in 2 weeks? As I understand it, there's to be something doing on Wednesday." "Only a line-up, as I understand it. Then on Friday the boss sends them word to quit, giving them 24 hours to make up their minds whether they will go to heaven or down the river." "Yes, I guess that's the programme," said the policeman, successfully hiding the satisfaction that made his pulses throb. He felt this was the official plan, as it coincided so well with the terms of the letter now again folded in its place in the cell of 5 Ace Dan. Had Hope been without orders, he would have made an excuse, and posted back to town right away; but his sergeant had told him to masquerade among the rebels, and he must obey orders. So he resumed the upward march, with the remark, "Well, pard, I guess we had better hit the trail," whereupon the pard, with the accompaniment of numerous oaths and grunts and sighs, struggled to his feet and onward up the hill. End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 31. An Odious Dilemma. Smoothbore was in possession of the facts Constable Hope had been able to gather, which were indeed very little less than the complete plot. 1,500 men were camped in the bushes at the back of the Dome, with enough bullets to kill the standing army of the British Empire, and he had available a few more than 100 men. True, they were good men, but so were most of those on the other side. The trouble was that both parties were right. It was for him and his men to subdue this rebellion, because it threatened the integrity and honour of the Empire. At the same time, the insurrectos were demanding simple justice. It was an odious dilemma. In his mind's eye he pictured the vast spaces that stretched between the Klondike and the outside. They could hardly seem farther away from help if the Klondike were on the planet Mars. Well, he would not surrender. It would be better to die. The Yukon was sweeping along but a stone's throw from the gate of the barracks. In 8 or 10 hours its rapid course would carry them into the United States. That might be a resource of security to his men, if they were beaten, but for himself he would fill a grave in that region of eternal frost. It was Tuesday evening, the sun was sinking in the north, heaven's vault was finely painted in pink. The abrupt cliff on the west of the Yukon threw a deep shadow across the mighty river, whose stately flood had long held sovereignty in that weird land of dreams. The light from the clouds above struggled against the shadows in the river, and was blended with them. It was certainly majestic, magnificent. The Commandant, as he walked up and down his office, often paused to gaze upon the familiar scene. A knock on the door caused him to start round. It was Herbert. "I came to inquire, sir, for any fresh news on the situation." "The news is, Herbert, that we may as well prepare to die a soldier's death. There is to be a display of force to morrow, and mobilization on Friday, when a request to surrender will be sent in. Hostilities will open on Saturday." "What will be their demands?" "That the police and all Government officials quit the country. In other words, go down the river." "And you will not comply?" "I will not comply." "Can nothing be done, sir?" "Nothing but to fight to the last drop of blood." "And the ultimate result?" Anyhow, we shall have upheld the prestige of the British uniform." There was a pause. Both men were very thoughtful. The Commandant then asked, "You remember Child?" "Yes." "He followed orders. He rode to death because his orders were to arrest, not to shoot. He did not flinch before the levelled rifle. What he did as an individual, the 150 of us can do." "But we shall shoot." "We shall, while a cartridge remains and a finger has strength to pull a trigger." Herbert looked glum. He was not a coward, but he thought his chief's policy was all wrong, and he was to give up his life or die in ignominy. It made him bitter, and then his mind travelled across the great stretch of glacier, mountain, and plain, to his little cottage on the prairie. It was not cowardice that brought the moisture to his eyes. "Damn it all, sir, it's hard to die here like a rat in a trap," Herbert cried. He did not share his chief's idealism. Promise to force the Commissioner to bring some sort of order out of chaos, and clear out the Gold Commissioner's office. Smoothbore knew of the cottage and the little girl with golden curls who was all the world to the inspector, so he understood the emotion of the other and felt sympathy. Reform! A promise of reform at this stage of the game would be no good. The leader of this movement is an idealist, a fanatic, and 3/4 of his followers, luck having been against them, hope to restore their fortunes by the experiment of a new government. The situation is not dissimilar to that in the 13 colonies at the Revolution. A leader of parts, of education, imbued with theories on the rights of man, at the head of a mob thirsting for the lands and jobs of the Loyalists. Why has Alaska a population? Because the sheriff back east could not shoot straight. Why had America a population before the Revolution? Because there were not prisons enough in Europe. In fact, the situation in the Klondike to day is much the same as it was in America before the Revolution. Only perhaps there is more justice on the side of these, our enemies, than there was on the side of the Yankees. The government of George III taxed tea, which was then much more of a luxury than it is to day. Our government taxes the one product of our people. It was a long speech for the Commandant, but he knew what he was talking about. Herbert sighed. "Any special orders, sir?" he asked. "No. The men have been given their new arms, and the situation is pretty well understood among them." "They are in fine fettle, sir, and spirit. Good. If, as I expect, hostilities open and things look hopeless, I shall give every man the opportunity of passing out and down the river, and this will include officers. But as for surrender, I won't." Herbert, about to make his adieux, turned towards the door, when the Chief remarked, "It appears a prisoner, known as 5 Ace Dan, has been receiving communications from one of the leaders of the rising. I have given orders that a double guard be put on these men, and special sentries, to see that no word passes among them. You will see that those orders are carried out." "Yes, sir. Good night, sir." "Good night, Herbert." Smoothbore gazed at the river once again. It swung on its majestic course, but the rose tints were gone, only the dark shadows of the hill remained. The hour seemed ominous. Chapter 32 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 32 A Derelict. Surgeon Major Peel was strongly imbued with the instincts of humanity, but, like many professional men, his business acumen was small. While 1 or 2 of his patients were prosperous claim owners who could afford to pay 1.5 ounces of gold dust per day, there were many who passed into his care who could not pay, and these, the poorly nourished and mentally depressed, were the most susceptible to attacks by the deadly typhoid bacillus. Not that the patients were dishonest, they simply had not the money. What could be done under the circumstances? The delirious victim who was bundled up to the doors of St. George's could not be turned away. Obviously it was the duty of the Government, reaping enormous revenues from the whisky traffic and the gold royalty, to pay. One day, it was the Tuesday before the meeting on the Dome, a big hulk of a man joined the patients of the St. George's Private Hospital. His temperature was 104.5, and he was delirious. A neighbour had brought him. His name was unknown. His residence was given as the North End. It was Long Shorty. "Poor fellow," remarked the Surgeon Major sympathetically, when he had taken his pulse, had slipped the thermometer under his arm, and was watching the gasping figure. "Typhoid attacks even the strongest. What a handsome animal he would be if his face showed less dissipation." "He does not look likely to prove a profitable guest," Alice commented. She was the housekeeper of the establishment, and found the domestic problems more difficult than her father imagined. "Who knows? Who knows? He may have property which will turn out a bonanza. Think of Gold Hill, 10 English pounds to each shovelful of dirt dug from the bed rock, and the claim owners round about were coming to the 2 Swedes who owned the claim to ask them to work for wages." "Yes, father," said Alice, "but there's another side to these stories. Think of the thousands in and around Dawson living on 1 meal a day. It is always the same in every mining excitement. It is either too much wealth or nothing at all." She was evidently thinking of John, remembering his talk of experiences. Her father, who, though blind to many of the aspects of life, was a keen observer of his daughter, guessed at the truth. "It is strange we can learn nothing of John," he said. "He must be away on the creeks," she answered wistfully. "I have sent several letters to him through the post, and it can't be that they all would go astray." The girl sighed, and her father busied himself anew with the work of the hospital. "Fred is to give this man a cold bath and put him in Ward C. I really must see the Commissioner, Hi U Bill they call him, and come to some understanding as to indigent patients." For some reason, not apparent on the surface, Long Shorty made a great impression upon Alice. She interested herself in his case, and often sat by his bed. His fever remained high and persistent. He was still delirious. Wild things he said. What most interested Alice was his continuous references to Parson Jack. "Parson Jack, I knew he was no tenderfoot, a fellow what would mush 45 miles for a sick pal. Parson Jack! And then want to mush back again. Parson Jack! Parson Jack! He gave Poo Bah hell! Hell on toast! Parson Jack!" And the great muscles would stand out upon his neck and arms as he waved his clenched fists in the air. Parson Jack might mean any one, thought Alice. The fever had run about a week of its course when Long Shorty entered the hospital, so that the disease had another 2 weeks to run before the crisis would be reached. There was nothing to do but wait patiently for the return of consciousness. In the meantime her imagination pictured much. She tried by suggestion to shape the course of his ravings, but found they were as fleeting and volatile as the changing winds of the heavens. The special services rendered by Alice to Long Shorty did not escape her father's notice. He remarked to her one day, "Alice, no one could accuse you of worldliness. You certainly are giving the delirious patient in Ward C a full measure of attention." "Do you know, father," she then said frankly, "in some ways he reminds me of John. I don't know how it is. I suppose they have something in common. Something may link them together. He is perpetually calling on Parson Jack." "Ha!" snorted her father. "Our patient is far from being of the type of Berwick." Both of them hurried away to their work. That same evening, hours after the day staff had ceased their labours, Alice was watching beside Long Shorty, and, notwithstanding its many disagreeable passages, listened to his wild flow of language. He was ever living over again his struggles with the forces of nature, with his fellows, and his own tempestuous passions. "The blue water! The blue water! Keep her to the blue!" Her patient was again living a dash through a rapid in a canoe. "White water means rocks and death! Death! Death, I say! To the right!" And he would shout. In those anxious, weary hours the girl grew to realise something of the wild, rough life of the frontiersman. On the morning of the Friday when the ultimatum was to be sent to Smoothbore, Peel returned to the hospital from the town. He was in a condition of excitement, as was every one else in Dawson. "Alice, that typhoid fellow was talking about Parson Jack?" "He was," replied Alice, opening her eyes with expectancy. "Why do you say that?" "Because that's the chap who is trying to overthrow the Government. Our patient may be one of the conspirators." "Possibly," said Alice, and hastened away. She knew Parson Jack was Berwick. Intuition told her so. She was absolutely certain of the fact. The news that a plot was brewing had, of course, penetrated the walls of the hospital. Now that Alice knew John Berwick was concerned in it, her interest quickened, and her anxieties awoke. Chapter 32. Chapter 33 of the Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W. H. P. Jarvis. Chapter 33. Tribute. The demonstration of force, as organised by Berwick, had taken place according to schedule. The display was plainly seen from the barracks, and its intent generally known throughout the town, wherein it became the one topic of conversation. The dance halls were but half patronised; the gambling tables seemed to have lost their popularity on that Wednesday night. Not that any fear was felt. The men of Dawson were generally not of the fearing type. They were thirsty for news. Their interest was so stirred that they must let off steam by talking. In the Borealis the woman nicknamed Round Eyes stood apart. Of all the faces present, hers alone showed apprehension, for she had a real regard for Poo Bah, the prince of grafters, whose domination at last was threatened. Suddenly her eyes lit up. A big hulk of a man came stumbling into the place. Poo Bah! Her face grew white as she ran up and caught his arm. "What will they do with you?" she asked. "Nothing, I guess," he laughed in a rambling manner. "What do they want me for?" "Some fellow you've done up will take a shot at you now there's no danger of the yellow legs." Until the present crisis the prestige of the police had been so great that the possibility of any one seeking and gratifying personal revenge had never crossed Poo Bah's mind. What would happen now? With all his confidence, the question asked by the girl would repeat itself. He knew he was not popular. Many a man owed the wreck of his fortune to him, and would enjoy a chance of shooting him. His hands clenched for a minute, but he put the thought away. It was the spirit of the voyageur, the custom of the country, to brush aside the disagreeable. The thought of death, and of what may come after death, was resolutely set aside. "Oh, hell, come and have a drink." So he endeavoured to disperse his own and the woman's fears. She was not so easily satisfied. She caught him again by the arm, bowed her head against his shoulder, and sobbed. "Oh, my baby, my baby! Somebody will blow daylight through you!" Poo Bah drew his arm roughly from her with the single word "Quit!" and strode towards a curtained recess, Round Eyes meekly following. In a minute or two a champagne bottle popped, and there was laughter, expressing the wild spirits of the underworld. Meanwhile, on the Dome, John Berwick paced up and down, a prey to conflicting motives. He was now full in the vortex of civil strife. A few short days, and hostilities in all probability would open. He had no doubts now as to the spirit to be shown by the Police Commandant. On Point Lookout sat Constable Hope, with his face towards the Upper Yukon. To the left he could see the Klondike Valley; to the right were the police barracks, with Dawson beyond them. His back was to the Dome. He sat still. A project was in his mind. He was thinking hard. At the same time Smoothbore was in his office with Hi U Bill, the Commissioner, and Inspector Herbert. Sergeant Galbraith stood at attention before them. "You have ordered your men to be in readiness to fall back upon the barracks. The orders for additional commissariat are placed with the different companies? The men, I suppose, pretty well understand what is in the wind?" "Yes, sir," Galbraith answered to every question. "And the men are in good spirits?" "I have told them, sir, you intend to fight." "And how do they seem to take it?" "One of the fellows said he'd go to hell for you, sir." "Well, that would seem satisfactory." The Commandant smiled grimly. "Our best hope is dissension among the rebels, and I have no idea how that may be brought about." "That will do, Sergeant." After the policeman had left there was silence for some time, which was at last broken by Hi U Bill. "I don't fancy they will do anything to me, and as I'm not called upon to fight, I'm out of it. I am, and I suppose I may say it in modesty, a bit of a shot, but one has others to consider as well as himself." The Commissioner was in the habit of spending his afternoons at target practice, which was not altogether appreciated by those whose business with him was pressing. "I'm afraid you are altogether too modest. You know you're a famous shot." Under usual circumstances Hi U Bill was quite ready to receive compliments on his shooting; but the present circumstances were extraordinary, and he was undoubtedly perturbed. But the Commandant was merciless, for he continued, "Of course I am letting it be understood that I shall welcome all volunteers who desire to lend their aid at the present crisis." "Yes, yes; no doubt there will be many who will avail themselves of the opportunity." Hi U Bill was not over enthusiastic as he said this. "Indeed, I think I could make my friends fairly comfortable under the circumstances." "Certainly, quite so. My cabin at the north end is quite comfortable, and so close under the Dome that they could not shoot at me unless they came half way down, in which case they would expose themselves to your fire. Capital idea, that of yours, securing the long-range sporting rifles. I almost feel sorry that I could not be with you here, as well as at my cabin, just to try a shot or two. But you see, I think I had better stay outside. I have many friends among the old-timers, and nobody has ever accused me of doing anything serious. I certainly am not rich on ill-gotten gains." Hi-u Bill rubbed his hands nervously and cast a look at the dome. "Of course, if you feel," Smoothbore was choosing his words, "there is fear of any of the unsuccessful attributing their failure to you and wreaking vengeance on you, I shall be quite happy to give you our protection." "Oh, no, no. I prefer to run my chances outside, really I do." Herbert, who was distressed equally at the irony of his chief and the determined density of the Commissioner, diverted the conversation to another channel. "In case of a siege, sir, there will be the question of water supply." "Yes, I have thought of that. We shall have a supply from the river before hostilities break out, and after that a well may be sunk in 24 hours. The earth is not frozen here. But then if something turns up—" "Something turns up!" ejaculated Hi-u Bill, almost rising from his seat. "What could turn up? It would take an army 18 months to get here across country, even by the Stikeen route. It will be close upon winter by the time news of this reaches Ottawa, and by the earliest time a force could be fitted out the passes would be oceans deep in snow." "I know. There's the luck of the British Empire." There was a quiet smile on Smoothbore's lips. "Something always has turned up to save the British, except in the case of Gordon. That was the exception to the rule." There was a sharp knock at the door, and the "Come in" was answered by Constable Hope, his face flushed. He was evidently very excited. The idea, on which for long he had been brooding, had come to maturity. "I have a plan, sir, which will save us, I think. To carry it out I shall require gold, within limits, but the more the better." "Gold!" "The Commandant should have large quantities, the proceeds of royalty collections." Hi-u Bill pricked up his ears, bethought him of the fact, and asked directly, "What have you done with all your gold?" "I've had it buried. The plan of the exact spot will reach the authorities if we go under. But 40 Mile royalty came in to day, and has not yet been buried. How much do you want?" he asked. Constable Hope's heart gave a great leap as he realized he was going to be trusted. "At least $20,000, sir. Down river gold will do." "Your plan will take that much?" "I shall need that much, sir, but shall return it all, or nearly all." "Very good, here it is." With the words the Commandant took a bag of gold out of a rough chest and handed it to the policeman. "Thank you, sir, that will do, Hope." "Very good, sir." With the best salute he was master of, the youth left the office. Hi-u Bill had both eyes wide open, staring at Smoothbore. "What the devil—" "That is just a tribute to the gods. I may not bribe our enemies, but the fates—" "A bag of gold you can hardly lift! Why, your man will go down the river and stay down. You know the Yanks would afford him every protection, seeing that he stole from our government." "He won't steal the gold," replied Smoothbore. "He won't! How do you know he won't?" "I know my men." An unusual thing had happened. For a private to ask his commanding officer for the loan of $20,000 in gold, for that commanding officer to entrust it to him for some unexpressed purpose was strange, but many strange things happen on the frontier, and this was a time of crisis. Chapter 34 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 34. No Surrender. Berwick's muster had been 1,500 strong on the Friday at noon. Of discipline there was little or none, and Berwick knew better than to attempt to enforce any. They had chosen him as their leader, and up to the present had not disputed his authority. His directions were that the men should hold the Dome, retire to their camps in the forest to cook their food, but be ever ready promptly to regain their position. At noon he stood upon a boulder and read to his followers the summons to surrender he had despatched to Smoothbore. To the present, 9 o'clock in the evening, no answer had been received. The summons to surrender was being received with contempt. He felt the responsibility upon him greater than ever. Its weight increased as the time for the use of force approached. The 24 hours' notice before striking had nearly expired. He loathed the prospect of taking life, and prayed that the police would submit. If only they would see the hopelessness of resistance and send a pacific answer. Would that answer never come? As he sat in meditation, Berwick observed a restlessness among some men who were grouped, talking, gazing down the river. He looked in the same direction, and noticed a column of smoke. Then the hulk of a river steamer hove in sight. This visibly affected the men, who began to leave their posts and scramble down the hill to the town. The arrival of a steamer in Dawson in the summer of 1898 was a matter of moment. An idea came to Berwick at the sight of her and the procession of people hurrying to meet her. He would go to the town. Everybody there would be keen to attend the docking of the steamer, making it practically certain that his visit to the Barracks would not be noticed. So to the Barracks he went. "I wish to see the officer commanding," he said to the sentry. "Name?" "John Berwick." The man gulped and stared at the visitor. He knocked at the door and announced, "A man to see you, sir, by name of John Berwick." Hi-u Bill was again in the office, had just read the ultimatum, the discussion of which had been interrupted by the entrance of the man. He opened his eyes wide at the mention of the rebel's name. "Show him in." Had the usual happy accident come to pass? Flashed through Smoothbore's mind as he gazed with eyes of curiosity at the pseudo-president of the Klondike Free State that was to be. Berwick entered and stood facing the two chief executive officers of the Government. He at once picked out the police commandant, and returned his gaze without flinching. "What can I do for you?" he was asked. "I've come in the hopes of saving life. I have come to plead with you to comply with our request and surrender to our forces." Smoothbore was struck by the transparent candour of the man and his quixotism. "British garrisons are not in the habit of surrendering at the call of rebels," he answered stiffly. The word rebel roused Berwick. It stung. "I do not come to you from any cowardice, or through fear of death or defeat. I come in the spirit of humanity." "A very worthy mission. Then why not disband your forces?" Berwick brushed the suggestion aside. "I have 10 men for every one of yours, and my position commands these buildings. My men are in earnest, and there is justice in our cause, even to warrant the shedding of blood. This you must recognise." "I recognise nothing but that I am here to uphold the law of the land." "You must know, you must recognise, that great dishonesty exists within the civil service, and that we have met to protest, and put an end to it." "Officially I know nothing of that. It is my duty to maintain the Union Jack flying in the land." "We can fire your buildings." "You may be able to fire our buildings, you may be able to kill us all, and then you may lower the flag. I tell you I intend to sink with my ship. When you have burned us out, those men of mine, who wish to, may take to the river. That is all. You have my answer." Berwick's eyes filled. A lump was in his throat. He gulped, and with a husky good evening staggered into the open. He bent his head that the sentry might not see his emotion, and so gained the street by the Yukon's bank. "He does not look much like a traitor," remarked Hi-u Bill. "He is a man of evident ability. I fancy in England, in other days, he would have been a Whig. He has too little philosophy, or too much. Well, Commissioner," he said to Hi-u Bill, "are you going to stay with me, or run your chances in the town?" "Me? I really think I'd better stay in my cabin. You see, I am really not in this, and there are a lot of papers and records I had better bury somewhere." On leaving the Barracks, Berwick had been in somewhat of a daze. He was still in that condition when he found himself at the dock. The steamer Susan was tying to the wharf. The swift current had made docking difficult, so that he was in time to witness the landing of the passengers. The crowd on the steamer was much as he had expected. But there was one man coming down the gangplank who attracted his attention, and that of the onlookers generally. His hair fell to his shoulders. He had a great beard. His clothes were covered with grease, and he was very dirty. He had a small pack strapped to his back. It was a very small pack, not much larger than a turnip. Yet the figure that carried it bent under the load. Chapter 35 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 35. The Man with the Pouch. There were no signs of hesitancy in the movements of the man with the small round burden. He entered the Borealis, advanced to the bar, upon which he threw down the sack. "Pass along your poison," said he to the bartender. "What will it be?" "What'll it be? Why, wine. What else would it be? Pass along a bottle." "Large or small?" "Large or small? Why, large, of course. Say, son, what do you take me for?" The bottle of wine was opened, and the newcomer quenched a willing thirst. He then turned to the crowd that had by this time clustered round him. "Come on and have a drink, boys," he said, waving the bottle. "Belly up to this good American timber." He jumped upon the bar and drank again. "Wine! Wine! Give them wine! Feed the nectar of the gods to the swine! Make 'em happy for once!" Notwithstanding the manner of the invitation, the crowd responded, and soon the two bartenders were busy. "Stack the empties there so I can see and count 'em, $30 per," and the host pointed to a shelf against the wall. "Where did you get it?" shouted one of his guests. He made no reply, but continued his tirade. "Ah, you malamoots, you coyotes, you swine, descended of jackals, drink, damn you, drink! You who live in this neck of the woods and lie down and are robbed, no self-respecting jackal would own you for his sons. You who call yourselves citizens of the great and glorious United States. You're here rottin' in your cabins, the manhood squashed out of you by the yellow legs. Say, throw the booze into you, and then tell me what I can call you to let you know how low down I think you." "Say, partner," called another, "cut out all that and tell us where you got the swag." "You sundowners and larrikins, do you not remember Hanson's reward? Why don't you get in and dig? Blow that and tell us what's what. Straight wire." Kalgoorlie Charlie also was feeling the effect of the liquor. The man on the bar began to dance a hornpipe, while the crowd surged excitedly around. The news had spread like wildfire through the dance halls. "Some fellow from New Diggings was blowing himself." The Borealis soon became crowded. "Ah, you lily-livered, gelatinous vertebrate apologies for men!" cried he. "What do you take me for? Me to go off into the bush for months and rustle New Diggings, and then tell a lot of perambulating carrion like you where I struck it. Drink and be damned to you. I don't care for a little gold. I wouldn't mind letting you have a claim next to mine. The claim I have will produce enough gold to make the Bank of England look like the baby's savings account. Do you think I'd show a bunch of weary willies like you where a month's work would make you all millionaires? Come, have another drink and get wise." The speaker again put the mouth of his bottle to his lips, but a keen observer would have noticed that his throat gave no movement to indicate that the wine was passing to his stomach. This was noticed by Berwick alone, who had followed the man with the big poke, but had stood just inside the doorway. Berwick guessed he was acting a part, and wondered why. He watched. There was a confused buzz of conversation. "He must have struck the real stuff," remarked one. "He sure has the goods," agreed another. "This will make a hole in his poke," said a third. "If what he says is anything near right, this ain't a pinch of snuff," was the comment of a fourth. The man dancing on the bar stood waving his bottle, looking at the crowd with a stupid stare, evidently awaiting inspiration, when a voice cried, "Say, old cock, won't you let us have the news? We'll protect you in discovery." "Ah, you North American Chinamen, called Canadians, do you know what I think of you? You English, you ain't no better than the others. Do you all know what I think of you? You've told us straight enough, there's lots of colour in your bouquets. Now tell us which way the New Diggings is." "There ain't no yellow legs there." Someone shouted, "There won't be any yellow legs here after tomorrow." But the remark was lost in the general noise. "It's in Alaska, God's country," came a voice from the tumult. "I did not say so." "But it is, it is." "I don't say it ain't." "It's in God's country. Whereabouts?" "That's what I ain't tellin'." There was a clamour of inquiries. The newcomer, still holding his bottle prominently, was the target of eager gaze. "Up the Porcupine, the Tanana, or the Koyukuk?" "You must think I'm easy." He spoke with a leer. "You've made your stake. Why not tell us where to make ours? It's a law of the frontier." "So it is among pards. You ain't no pards of mine. I'm just standing you a few drinks out of pity, finding my reward in telling you what I think of you." "You've told us what you think of us. Now tell us what we want to hear." "Quite sure I've expressed myself strong enough?" "Quite, oh, quite!" came from a dozen voices. "Well, then, I'll tell you." But he from the newly found El Dorado stopped at the promise, and paused, regarding his audience. A strange silence came over the erstwhile struggling and swaying mass. The building was full, and the crowd extended into the street, where there were hundreds more, and to this great number additions were continually being made. "Well, where is it?" It's on the South Fork." The speaker put the bottle to his mouth once more. Groans and hisses broke from the crowd. "If you don't tell us after keeping us here, we'll string you up on a telegraph pole." "I did not keep you here. It was the free booze. Besides, there ain't no telegraph poles in Dawson." "Well, we'll chuck you into the river." "I'll swim out. I'm strong on baths, though perhaps I don't look it. Have another drink?" "What we want now is a straight tip, and you'd better give it." "It's on the South Fork of the North Branch." "The North Branch of what?" "I ain't telling." "By God, you'd better. We ain't going to stand for more fooling." "You are all what I say you are, the scum of the earth." "All right, we're anything you like, but let us have the news." "It's the South Fork of the North Branch of the South Fork." "What are you quitting for? Why don't you spit it out of you?" "Ain't I getting rid of it?" "Not fast enough. Quick, out with it." "Don't be impatient, sons. Patience is a great virtue. It's taken me nigh to 50 years hard prospecting to make a strike, and you fellows want me to tell you all about it in 50 minutes. How many minutes are there in 50 years?" "You old fool, you'd better quit playing with us." "Who wants to play with you?" "You're teasing us now. Quit. What river is this where you found the gold?" "Well, it's the South Fork of the North Branch of the South Fork of the South Branch." "Ah, hell!" interrupted one of the impatient ones. "There now, just when I get going, you fellows spoil it all. Remember, it took 50 years almost." "And it will take you 50 years to tell us where you did find it." "No, it won't. It's on the 57-mile river." "The 57-mile river? The South Fork of the North Branch of the South Fork of the North Branch of the 57-mile river?" A great shout went up. The 57-mile river emptied into the Yukon on the Canadian side, but it headed in Alaska, where the diggings probably were. Within 2 minutes the Borealis was practically empty. Of the few remaining, John Berwick was one. He stood with his back to the wall, staring at the man who still stood on the bar, who returned the stare. Meanwhile the host had turned to the row of bottles and begun the counting. The number was 60. 60, $1,800, cheap at double the money, said the man, who proceeded to weigh out the cost. That done, he stalked out of the saloon and rapidly went his way. There was so much activity and excitement about that his progress to the barracks was uninterrupted. No sooner was he within the gate than he tore off his beard and wig. It was Constable Hope. Berwick had followed him from the saloon and watched him enter the barracks. He now realized all that it meant. A blow had been struck at his organization. He realized that it was too late for any counter-effort. Greed of gold had taken possession of the men. A new rush was beginning. What call could reason, loyalty, righteousness make against that? He wandered to the waterfront and watched the activity, for within half an hour of the news of the supposed new strike being received, boats had begun to shoot out from the river bank, bearing adventurers to the new diggings. End of chapter 35. Chapter 36 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 36 After the Crisis. Mankind in Dawson having muddled its affairs, the gods took a hand in the game. John Berwick, as he turned his face homewards early on the following day, happened to take the route that would carry him by the barracks, notwithstanding that it would add a mile to the journey. As he climbed the Hog's Back to Lookout Point, he saw the tall military figure of Smoothbore in front of him. The Commandant, seeing him coming, awaited him. "Good morning. The air is very good." "It is indeed." After this there was a pause. Evidently Smoothbore desired to make no reference to the interview of the preceding day. Possibly he judged the cause of the Reformers to be already lost. If so, Berwick would give him every opportunity of keeping the conversation from politics, so he continued. "How pure the Klondike is, and clear, and how beautiful are the shades across the Yukon." "And only man is vile," quoted the Commandant. Berwick realized that the head of the police was poking fun at him, and, not knowing Smoothbore very well, concluded that he must know of the new stampede. In fact, he seemed to be watching the dark specks of moving men streaming over the summit of the Dome. "Do you often walk abroad so early?" John asked. "Yes, it is becoming a habit. One requires but little sleep in this climate. I shall soon return and go to work." "Are your labours heavy?" "Oh, heavy enough. There are many details." "You have a splendid force, sir." "I have, and they are loyal to me and their country." "Loyalty is among the chief of human virtues; but is loyalty in all cases a virtue?" "I consider it so." "Your men must find many duties distasteful to them." "Duty is often distasteful, but it is never to be mistaken. With me it is very well defined. Are you also taking a morning constitutional?" "I am going up to the Dome." It would not do for John to let the other know the whereabouts of his abode, or to divulge the fact that it was his custom to sleep at night. It was a custom with many in that city of perpetual light to sleep in the normal daytime and work at night. "I'm going the same way. We'll walk together. I wish to spy out the land a bit. We may decide to build a trail to Moosehide." The two continued on the winding trail, which was now lined with human habitations, set down without any idea of system. Some were cabins, others tents, others still a combination of the two, such indeed as was John's home ranch. Before many of them camp fires were crackling and burning, and meals were being prepared. The two who were, or had been, the leaders of the opposing parties passed without attention being paid to them. "Ah, there's the danger signal, the result of the first frost, and a sign that summer will soon pass away." John pointed to a willow whose leaves had turned crimson and scarlet. "Yes, we shall have winter soon. This weather won't last. But you are in error in supposing that the bright tints in our foliage are due to frost. The mistake is very common. The redness is mere ripeness." They found many topics in common, and mutual interest made the stiff effort less trying as they climbed and climbed. As they approached a point on the trail half way to the summit, a man was seen coming down dragging a log by a rope. They stepped aside from the path, which here was on the side hill. Berwick, who was outside, happened to place his foot on a loose lump of moss lying on a stone. It moved. His foot slipped. He lost his balance. He struggled on the shelving ground, grabbed at some grass, was tangled in some brush, tore his hands, went down with a crash, being stopped by a sharpened stump of a severed tree trunk. The point grazed his arm and pierced the body under the shoulder blade. At once the Commandant and the woodman went to his help, but the jar of attempting to raise him brought a cry of pain. It was necessary to cut the tree stump before he could be assisted to his feet. They had to carry him down the hill, his mind in a half swoon, punctuated with throbs and stabs of pain, until he awoke to consciousness in the St. George's Hospital. It seemed more as the remembrance of a dream than of actual occurrence. He was in England. Even the voice of Alice! A pungent odour was about him. He heard a buzzing rising rapidly in key, higher, higher, yet higher. Higher, higher still. Then there was a click. As John Berwick's senses were stolen away by the blessed influence of an anaesthetic, his lips framed the word Alice. She heard the name and was glad. The first words John uttered as the drug left him were incoherent, but gradually they took form. "Who's afraid to die? I'm not afraid to die. What's the good of a man's religion if he's afraid to die?" "I know you're not afraid to die," said Alice. The only reply she got was, "Oh, my head, my head." "What's the matter with your head?" "Oh, my head, it's bursting." "Water, water," continued to be his cry; but Alice would feed him with only a drop or two at a time. Gradually his ravings grew less pronounced, less frequent. "Who are you?" he asked, after gazing for some time with dazed eyes at Alice. "You look very like Alice Peel. Alice is in England, and where am I?" "I'm glad I look like Alice Peel," she said in reply. "She's the only girl in all the world," he murmured, before his mind again wandered, and he muttered straggling fragments of verses. "Alice, Alice!" he cried suddenly. "Yes," said Alice, soothing his head with her cool hand. He recognized her. "Alice!" he cried again. She bent over and kissed him. "Go to sleep," she said. John did as he was commanded. When he woke 2 hours later he called for water, and Alice gave him some from a cup. "Alice, I've been wounded. Yes, I remember that. But How did you get here?" "I will tell you to morrow when you're stronger. You must not excite yourself now." But at 6 o'clock that evening Surgeon Major Peel, taking his temperature and finding it normal, gave the necessary permission. So Alice told their story. End of chapter 36. Chapter 37 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike by W. H. P. Jarvis. Chapter 37 Oil on Troubled Waters. John Berwick's accident was the last touch which caused the uprising to crumble, one more great effort after the ideal of justice had fallen and parted. Frank Corte was sitting in front of the Dominion Creek cabin, by the side of a pool of water that had formed since the claims, which rightfully belonged to himself and his 3 associates, had been taken over by the agents of Poo Bah. The policy of the land was to reap to day and spend to morrow, so a dam had been put in on the Pup, or tributary of Dominion Creek, that entered above the claims, and already a harvest was in sight. Frank had some possessions in the cabin, which he had come to fetch before joining the new stampede. Above the cabin was a line of sluice boxes, into which half a dozen lusty Scandinavians were shovelling the precious dirt. It was Frank's own claim they were working, and he gritted his teeth. For an instant his face lost its habitual grin. "If this was only God's country," he muttered, as he glanced through the open door of the cabin at the rifle hanging on the wall therein. He continued to whirl the gold pan which he held in his hands. In the pan was a handful of dirt he was idly concentrating. "The boss won't stand for it, and he's a white man." Frank smiled again. From the mining operations at the sluice boxes voices came to where Corte sat. Neither the foreman nor his men had realized that their voices were carrying beyond the sound of rushing water. They were shouting that they might hear each other above the roar in the sluices, and were laughing cheerily, for Poo Bah was a good paymaster to his men. $1, $2, 1 6 bits would float to Frank's ears, as the foreman estimated the contents of a pan, and he would inwardly groan as he calculated the wealth that was passing from him into the great grafter's pocket. "I guess we'd better clean up. We can get her down to the black sand by 10:30, and finished an hour later." Something rose in Frank's throat and almost choked him. The attitude of these intruders galled him. He half jumped up to seize his rifle, when "No," he muttered, "them yellow legs." His attention was attracted to the gold pan. Specks of gold were floating upon the water. At the bottom of the pan he noticed an unmistakable grease spot, and, true to its nature, it had secured to its surface several of the tiny yellow grains. Grease was alike fatal to the gold pan and the stamp battery. Suddenly his eyes took on a new light. They were full of energy. He glanced towards the working miners, and followed the line of sluices to the artificial pond in the Pup, where they got their water. "Yes, yes," he muttered, and sprang to his feet. He hurried to the quarters of one of his friends, Jerry, the engineer on a neighbouring claim where a steam plant had been installed. "Jerry," said Frank, "I want 2 bottles of lubricating oil." "Pretty near all I got." "Don't care, must have it." "All right, what do you want it for?" "Frying slapjacks." Frank went with his evil-smelling petroleum. "What the devil is he up to?" asked Jerry, as the drooping figure hulked out of sight. The weasel that peeped at him through the poles of his cabin floor could not tell him, nor did he know. Frank put the oil on the table of his cabin, and then went outside and began chopping wood. It was now the orthodox bedtime, so he must show a good reason for being about. The sun had just set in the north, the quarter it sets in the Northland. "Shut her off!" he heard the foreman cry, and he knew the cleaning was to be commenced. Down came the axe on a 4-inch stick of spruce with a force that burst it asunder and threw the pieces far apart. No experienced woodman in the ordinary course of events would have used so much force, and Frank Corte had chopped much wood. The roar of the water diminished. The voices of the clean-up men fell away. He could hear no more, but he knew every move. First, the riffles would be lifted from the sluice boxes and the dump box, and the dirt in the sluice boxes would be shovelled into the dump box. Then a strip of wood about 2 inches square would be placed across the dump box where it joined the head of the sluices. This would prevent the gold from being washed down the boxes. When these processes were accomplished, the foreman shouted, "Turn on half a head!" and Ole Oleson, at the gate, allowed half the usual flow of water to rush down the flume to the dump box. Had Frank watched the impact of the water on the dirt in the dump box, he would, even in the now failing light, have seen a burst of yellow shine out from what had previously appeared dross. As the water reached the dirt was forced against it by 3 or 4 stout paddles, whereby the husky workmen churned and washed the dirt thoroughly. Across the dump box, where the water met the pay dirt, stretched a band of gold. First it was half an inch, and then 2 inches. Meanwhile the pebbles and the dross worked their way over the retaining block and bumped ignominiously to the tailings. "It looks good," said the foreman in loud tones. Frank heard him then shout to Ole, "A quarter of a head." Corte thereupon threw down his axe. It was time for action. He went into the cabin and placed the 2 bottles of oil in a bucket, with which he set out for the dam. It was the most natural thing in the world for a man to draw a bucket of water before retiring. He might want a drink during the night. Ole was almost asleep when Frank came up to him. He was lounging over the gate. Frank greeted him with, "Good evening, partner. You're working late to night?" "That's so," was all Ole had life enough to answer. Frank slipped his bucket into the water, the bottle sank against the mud. The hues of iridescence spread across the weird and silent surface. The bottles were safely at the bottom of the pool, and the bucket full of water, as Frank turned towards the cabin, saying, "Good night, Ole." As he neared his cabin he heard the foreman shout, "Shut her half off!" and knew that the work of taking out the black sand from the dust was at hand. He knew that already the small specks of gold were being carried to the lower end of the pool. So he made haste, and taking a blanket, nailed it against the waste gate of the lower pond, so that the total flood from above went through it. Then he turned in. He was awake at 4 on the next morning, and proceeding to the lower pond, loosed the blanket, which was heavy with water and gold. Then he built a fire in the open, and after it was burning well, placed the blanket upon it. When the blanket was totally consumed and the fire burnt down, Frank collected the ashes and panned them out. The gold was fine in form and quality, and proved worth some thousands of dollars. "You chickaman stuff," laughed Frank. End of chapter 37. Chapter 38 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 38. Reunion. Frank Corte, mushing through to Dawson from Dominion Creek, took his time comfortably and arrived on the second evening. He danced till 5 in the morning, after which, as was natural, he lay down and slept. Accordingly, it was not until the evening after his arrival that he gave a thought to his 3 companions, and began to search for them by visiting the Borealis, and going the round of the dance halls and gambling saloons. He found George and Hugh, who were together, but not John. Something must surely have happened to him. George Bruce had visited his den several times lately. He was not there. At last, by inquiry at the police station, they learned that he had hurt himself by falling when climbing to the Dome, and had been taken to St. George's Private Hospital. It was about 9 in the evening when the 3 friends visited him in the ward. "Hullo, what's wrong now?" Frank cried. "Better than typhoid, anyway." Alice rose in indignation at the noise and clatter, but seeing John smile, reseated herself. Frank was broadly grinning. "Alice, this is Frank Corte, my good friend, George Bruce, and Hugh Spencer, my pards. Now you know personally the good fellows I've told you about." Alice shook hands with them, and there was a moment of some awkwardness, which Frank broke by saying, "Here," as he laid a large poke of gold on John's chest. "Where did you get it?" asked he. Frank took a sly glance at Alice. In fact, he had already taken several. She was certainly attractive, and had impressed him. His usual vocabulary was insufficient in the circumstances. He gave a sniff. "I applicationed the principles of childish lore to the exigencies of existence in a land of graft and corruption. I lubricated the wheels of the flow of justice, and distracted this here gold dust from Pooh Bah." "Who?" inquired Alice, frankly laughing. "Pooh Bah. He's the high mucky muck round here, sort of Man Friday to the octopus who's got his tentacles round these here environs." "How did you get the dust?" asked John again, as with critical eyes he estimated the value of the contents of the poke. Well, I was sitting in front of our cabin on the claims, with my brain working and my eyes on the quivy vivy, as them Frenchers would say, and I was ebolluting hot, and then I thought of grease. So I gets some lubricating oil, and then nature does the rest. Of course I was the instrument whereby the oil was placed in the sluices." John grasped Frank's meaning and method. It flashed upon him at the mention of the lubricating oil. "What do you mean to do with this gold?" Berwick asked. "You are going to keep it." "Oh, no, I can't do that. Why give it to me? Why to me more than to Hugh?" "Oh, he can get more. He's coming with me to God's country." "Where?" asked Alice, more than ever bewildered. "To God's country. The new strike down in Alaska. There'll be no Poo Bah there, and plenty of shotgun justice." "But there's George's interest." "George! Oh, he will put his up with ours O.K., I guess." Here Frank again looked at Alice. "I guess you'll be needing that stuff, if parsons charge like others do." John smiled at this, and Alice blushed. Leaving the friends together, for she knew they would wish to talk, she went from the room. "No, no, Frank, it won't do." Then, seeing that Corte looked troubled, he added, "I'll take a quarter if you like. You've proved yourself a comrade. But what's this about the new strike?" "Big gold excitement, richer than Bonanza and Eldorado, and best of all, in God's country. You'll be coming?" No, you must remember my work. Are you for giving up our enterprise to get justice done here and in other goldfields?" "Sure thing, me and Hugh. In fact, everything that don't wear hobbles is going." "And leave all this wrong unrighted?" "Sure thing. This ain't my country. I'm going where things can be made right overnight, and there ain't no yellow legs." "And you, Hugh? Are you going to Alaska?" "Yes, I think so. You see, the chances of getting in on a new strike seem good, and well, our great show has melted right away. It was a fine effort, but it failed. I don't mind running chances. In fact, I'm used to it. And after all, that's all Poo Bah and his chums know is grafting. Let them keep their dirty money." "It's a pity, a pity." John was thoughtful for a time. They were looking at him. "I don't know what I shall do if you and Frank desert me," sighed John. "Get married and settle down," Frank said bluntly. "You'll do all right," interposed Hugh. "You and George got record for 2 claims on the left limit of Bonanza, working out your quartz proposition right against Discovery. Well, this is Chechacho Hill, now reckoned amongst the richest ground in all the Klondike. You and George don't need to worry about Poo Bah and Dominion Creek hillsides, nor your daily bread, no more. I thought I would not tell George the news till I caught you 2 together. Frank and I will try our chances again, and George can stay here and watch you live happy ever afterwards." John frowned, his mind reverted to his mission. He believed that his duty was to the great portion of the Klondike's population whom Poo Bah and the system of grafters had wronged. He refused even yet to recognize the game was up. "Our people," he began, "our people are mostly down the river striking for God's country, where there ain't no yellow legs, and a shotgun holds down your claim." "Frank is right," interposed Hugh. "Our whole big following has gone." John knew this to be only too true. Alas, alas, the fickleness of man! Just like the Siwash, Sia Creeks, Hi-U Chickaman, we are all much alike, yes, yes, except some, and Frank glanced at Alice, who then entered the room with refreshment for the visitors. "Frank says that faraway creeks appear to hold much gold," John translated for the benefit of Alice. "Well, you're all right with your gold on Chechacho Hill," said Hugh. "I might have known it was there if I had only thought." "Why?" asked Bruce. "Because of Carmack finding gold on top of 20 feet of muck. I might have known that the gold slid down the hill. It wasn't creek gold Bonanza was discovered on. No, sir, it was hillside, and that accounts for its being above the muck there and nowhere else. If a fellow could only think right before he knows. We'll try and know right down in God's country, boss. Hugh and I must be going now. George won't be going with us. He has his claim in this yellow leg country." In the way of the goldfields they proceeded at once to say good bye. Corte and Spencer took their shares of the gold Frank had brought from Dominion Creek, and went carrying all manner of wishes for good from those they were leaving behind. Chapter 38. Chapter 39 of the Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 39. Retrospection. Constable Hope had been attracted by John Berwick, and meant to see more of him. so that when he met him one day with his arm in a sling, he showed himself friendly. Smoothbore's trooper was a youth of ideas, a good type of the fine force. Though he was still but 24 years of age, his life had so often been in danger that he had courage and character far beyond his years. As the incident which broke down the conspiracy had proved, he was an adventurer at heart, with more than usual brilliance and spirit. He would ride into a band of yelling, drunken savages and get his man without showing a gun, and time and again had solved difficulties through sheer daring, cleverness, and shrewd knowledge of men. He played the game for love of the game. Money, by way of graft, he did not deem any reward. John Berwick had interested him. He felt that they held interests in common, so when they met he addressed him. He was not in uniform, and Berwick had no idea he belonged to the police. He followed John into one of the gambling halls, whither John had gone in search of any of his old-time colleagues who might not have joined the stampede. As standing beside each other they watched the play at a black-jack table, a burly Swede lounged up, and from his hip pocket drew out a bag of dust, which he laid on the table in line with the wagers of the other players. The sack held about $3,000 worth of gold. The dealer dealt each man a card, slipping it under his wager, and then dealt another round. The different players, starting with the one on the dealer's left, after looking at what they had drawn, either tapped their cards if they wished another card, or placed their hand beneath their wager if they were content to stand. When it came to the Scandinavian's turn, he stood stupidly looking at his gold. "Well, what do you intend to do?" asked the dealer. "Have I got to leave that gold there?" "No, you can take it up if you want to," replied the other. The Swede hesitated, then picked up his gold and walked away, while the dealer idly turned over the cards, at sight of which even the stoic Dawson audience grew noisy with comments. The cards turned up were an ace and a king, black-jack, a winning hand against all others. "That's what a fellow gets whose nerve fails him," remarked Constable Hope. "Yes, but perhaps it is not always better to win." Constable Hope glanced shrewdly at John. He followed up the thought with a searching remark. "I wonder if it would have been better if the miners had won against the officials." "I wonder." The remark was not encouraging. "I heard you make your speech at the finish of the Dominion Creek stampede," Hope persisted in saying. "There does not seem to be much agitation in these days." "No, the discontented, or rather the wronged, have gone down the river, preferring the chances of a new field to securing justice here. Those who have property are afraid to speak. A goldfield is not a place where principle flourishes." "You're not like the Swede. You didn't lose your nerve," said Hope. Berwick made no reply. "Did you ever see a good man lose his nerve?" the policeman asked. "No." "Well, I have. Once I was in the mountains down below with a buck policeman, a Scotch Canadian from back east, and as good a trooper as ever sat a horse. Got lost in a blizzard on the prairies later on, and they never found him till spring. The coyotes had not left much of him. Well, Chisholm and I went hunting one day, and travelling along came to a box canyon. We decided to try and cross it. It was a couple of 100 feet deep, and we started, Chisholm going first. I led him down, he holding my hands with one of his, while with the other he grabbed a bush. No sooner had he put his foot on the ledge we figured on getting down to, than he found it soft and yielding. For some reason he dropped my hand and grabbed at a tuft of moss and hung there. Then his footing went further down, which drew his chest tight against the wall of the canyon. I threw myself on my stomach and grabbed him by the collar and said, "Jump!" His eyes glistened, and he appeared not to hear me. Then I looked over the edge and saw that the ledge he had been standing on had given way entirely, and that he was suspended by his arms alone. He would not speak. He would not move. The wild light in his eyes faded a bit, but there he hung, to all appearance dead. Had I not had a lariat with me, I should have been powerless. As it was, I got a slip knot around his feet, and so up under his arms, and this I made fast to a tree. Then I laughed at him. It is a wonderful light, that which comes into men's eyes at the fear of death. I have only seen it once again, in the eyes of a mother travelling on a river steamer who thought her child had fallen overboard. Losing your nerve is dangerous. When their drink and Hope's story were finished, they walked out in the street, where they met Smoothbore. As they passed him, John nodded, and his companion brought his hand half-way to the salute and then lowered it. Hope had given himself away. The other saw he was a policeman. "You know Smoothbore?" Hope asked. "I have spoken to him." Hope did not reply for a moment, after which he continued, "There's a man who never loses his nerve." It was the highest tribute Hope could pay. "Did you ever hear of Paper Collar Johnny?" "No," said John. Paper Collar was an officer down below, and he and Smoothbore were pals. They were out to a banquet one night and returning home late. In fact, dawn was breaking over the prairie, cold and misty, when they reached the ford of the river outside their post. It had been raining hard, the stream had risen, and the driver drew up before the ford and said, "The river seems pretty bad, sir." "Hold on," said Paper Collar, "this won't do. Mustn't try and cross that ford if the river is in flood." "Driver, halt!" ordered Smoothbore. "My companion wishes to alight. Get down, sir." Paper Collar stepped down on the prairie. "Now, driver, the ford." "And he took it all right?" "Yes, sir; and hours afterwards a patrol from the fort picked up poor Paper Collar." "What would Smoothbore have done had the miners risen after the Dominion Creek stampede?" Berwick ventured to ask. "He'd have fought, and the police would have stood by him. He'd have used his nerve." "I learn there is a Nordenfelt and a Maxim in the Passes. If the miners had got them down here and hauled them to the top of the Dome, they would have made things hot in the barracks." "Well, Maxim or no Maxim, Smoothbore would have fought. Neither he nor any of the police do any grafting, but we should have fought." "Perhaps it is as well the Alaska stampede began," said Berwick musingly. "It was very much better," said Hope decisively. So they parted, and Berwick felt the last word had been said about his bid for miners' justice. Chapter 39. Chapter 40 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 40. The Happy Ending. When the next day Alice accompanied John and George Bruce in a first visit to their claims on Chechacho Hill, they saw that the signal thrown out by the first red tints of the maples and the willows, which told of summer ending and the dreary months of winter beginning, was shown. The sun was shining brightly, but already it seemed robbed of some of its heat. Alice had often pictured life at the diggings. She had read numbers of mining camp stories, with scenes laid in America and Australia, yet had gained little insight to the realities. She gloried in the experience, and was eager to urge them on. "Hurry, hurry!" But John exhorted her to stay her speed, for the distance they had to go was 24 miles, and the trail, though many of the mud holes had dried, was rough. She looked at the men she met, hunting for the type of her fancy, the type engendered by novel and tale. No one seemed armed, save occasionally with a rifle or a shotgun; but the wild man with the brace of pistols, bandolier, huge moustache, and homicidal aspect did not present himself. They crossed the Klondike by Poo Bah's Ferry. Once in Bonanza Valley, Alice felt she had left the civilized world behind her, and was entering the enchanted regions of nature. To her, in her happy illusions, it was fairyland. Few women had preceded her over the Bonanza trail, so that men, mushing, who passed their fellows with lowered head, openly stared at her, and many of these lonely wayfarers would have been glad of a word from her, to hear again the sweet soft accents of the better world outside. For to the men of the frontier the idea of home is very refined and dear, and women ever virtuous and tender, so that the appearance of Alice Peel on the Bonanza trail upon that glorious day was to them as a beautiful picture and an uplifting influence. One grizzled miner hurried out, holding a gold pan full of nuggets, dust, and black sand. "Put your hand into it, lady, and see what it feels like." Alice did so, and thought it felt like any other sand, only heavier. He then selected a nugget, worth quite a sovereign, from the pan, and gave it to her. "Why did you give me this?" "Because you are a lady." Alice looked perplexed. "Keep it as a souvenir," said John; so she thanked the man, and slipped the nugget inside her glove. But that was not to be the limit of their host's hospitality, for as they turned to go he said, "It's just about noon, and if you've walked from Dawson, the lady must be near petered. Better stay and have dinner." "We thought of dining at the road house at Discovery," said George. "We have some ground on Chechacho Hill." "I can give you a better feed here: moose meat, either steak or nose, whichever you fancy. You see, lady, in the old days this was a sort of a pet locality for moose, so they stray in once in a while yet, and sometimes they don't get a chance to get away again." The sound of a horn came from a tent close by. The signal was answered by a general throwing down of tools, and the half dozen men at work made their way towards the tent. They all washed in a couple of tin basins, and dried themselves on a filthy towel. Alice and her companions were ushered into the dining tent, where, John's quick eyes noticed, extra places had been set. Alice was asked to sit at the head of the table, in the owner's place. John and George were seated at her right, and the owner, Wild Horse Bill, on the left. The men were already hard at work, consuming their food, moose steak, pork and beans, and great pieces of bread. As they sat down, the cook placed on the table a large tin platter, in which was a piece of meat of indescribable colour and shape. "This is moose nose, lady, the best part of the animal, and along with the beaver tail and wildcat makes the finest eating in the Northland." "Wildcat!" Alice exclaimed. She had indeed read of the tale of Canada's mascot being a frontier dainty, but moose nose and especially wildcat were new, and did not sound altogether attractive articles of diet. "Yes, lady, the lynx or wildcat is the best eating the trapper knows in the Northland. You'd think you were eating chicken. As for moose nose and beaver tail, one is much like the other." The owner pushed the platter containing the strange dainty towards Alice, with the words, "Help yourself, lady." Alice was game, and without showing her disinclination, she took up the knife and fork and cut off a piece of the blubberous meat, and put it on her plate. After they had walked about 1.5 miles beyond the claim where they had lunched, they stood beneath Chechacho Hill at the north east, 1/4 mile down stream from where Carmack had made his discovery, and John pointed to where their claims were situate. Men were at work rocking gold on the next claim to John's. When they reached their claims, Alice looked across the valley, noting the great stretches of poplar and birch, golden yellow in their autumn tints, and smiled at the beauty of it, till out of the chilled atmosphere somewhere came the whisper, "Make haste and provide." "I should like to live here always," whispered Alice to John, while Bruce went to talk with the men working on the claim alongside. "Always is a long time, and every day will not be as beautiful as this. But for a year or two—" Yes, for a year or two. And so it was decided. They were married in the little church by the side of the slough in Dawson. End of Chapter 40. End of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike.